It began with a typo in the sky. The blizzard, punctual as ever, descended upon Skjoldhar at 6:12. Note the even number. Northern snow prefers symmetry, and just as the first flake should have landed on Gudrun's forge roof, it stopped. Hung there, floated indecisively, up an inch, down a sigh, and froze midair like it had forgotten its verb. Not a miracle, just meteorological stage fright. "That's new," Gudrun muttered, hammering at nothing out of habit. On the cliff above the village, Sigrid was reading a menhir. Yes, reading. The stone had letters, of course, but Sigrid's gift was rarer. She listened. The rock was ancient, temperamental, fond of complaining about humidity. But today it was silent. "You swallowed your vowels again, didn't you?" she asked, pressing her ear to the granite. No reply. She dusted the surface, traced the runes, and saw the missing one, Rado, the rune of motion, travel, continuation, the rune that teaches snow to fall, rivers to run, stories to move to the next page. "Oh," said Sigrid, in the tone scholars reserve for catastrophe. Below, the frozen flake gave up on its career and turned to drizzle. Now, meddling with runes without temple approval was a capital offense. But when winter halts, someone has to press Control plus Alt plus fate. She pocketed her chalk, climbed down the cliff with the care of someone walking across grammar, and entered the forge. Gudrun squinted at her. "If you're here to correct my hammer, leave. It hits the way it wants." "I don't fix hammers," Sigrid said. "Just heavens, they're missing Rado." Gudrun scratched her brow. "That the rune for going?" "For continuing," Sigrid corrected, "because precision matters. Without it, snow doesn't fall, bread doesn't rise, love doesn't progress." "Offense taken only if I believed in love," Gudrun replied, hammering her invisible metal. Down at the pier, Bjorn Hrafsson was wrestling fishing nets in air too still to resist. A man with wind in his pockets and unfinished sentences for thoughts. He looked up when Sigrid arrived. "We've lost Rado." "I looked at the horizon," Bjorn said dryly. "Nothing came in." "It's not a boat. It's a rune." "Ah." He nodded with the reverence fishermen give to those who name currents. "That explains why glances don't reach their endings." "You felt it too?" "The fish quit halfway through being fish," he said. "Turned into intentions." Exaggeration? Hardly. In a world where words are operating systems, deleting one line of code wrecks reality. By dusk, Skjoldhar had noticed. The temple bell rang, twice, then stopped mid-third, confused by its own punctuation. Inside, the priestesses convened with scrolls, incense, and bureaucratic dread. At the head sat Asmundr, the retired god of runic punctuation, still correcting mortals for fun. "Rumors claim the rune Rado has absconded," he said. "Monuments refuse motion, the bell refuses cadence, and fish, insolent fish, have pause." "Not rumors," Sigrid interrupted, without authorization, naturally. "I heard it myself." Half the room gasped. The other half pretended not to enjoy the scandal. Asmundr eyed her like a semicolon judging a comma. "Is listening to rocks a licensed trade?" "Ancestral practice," she said. "And you're a walking M-dash, yet no one asked for credentials." A murmur, a smothered laugh. Even Gudrun's hammer approved quietly. Asmundr sighed, adjusting his tone like it had a spine. "Suppose Rado has taken leave. There's an old rite, the search for the stroke." "The stroke?" Bjorn asked. "The marker rune leaves when it walks away," Sigrid explained. "We'll need 4 travelers," Asmundr said gravely. "One who listens, one who guards, one who bargains, one who carries." "I'll guard," said Gudrun. "Someone's got to hit what words can't." "I'll bargain," said a deep voice behind them. Hrock, the Jotun of Thaw, emerged from nowhere, because subtle entrances are for mortals. "I negotiate with things that melt. I can ask the ice to release what it's hoarding." Bjorn exhaled. "That leaves the one who carries." "I follow the wind," he said. "If the rune left a breeze, I'll find it." And thus a company formed, without lunch, as tradition demands. The road to Helgado, the archived city beneath the ice, began with a bridge that had forgotten it was a bridge. "You're crossing," Sigrid told it. Used to be. The bridge grumbled in avalanche dialect. Present tense, please. You are. The stone shivered, remembered purpose, and reassembled, embarrassed but functional. Through valleys where wind practiced handwriting and mountains that hummed forgotten verbs, they traveled. Words drifted through the air like migrating birds. Breath later, small courage. At sunset, they reached a wall of silence. Smooth as fear, white as unwritten pages. Sigrid traced in the air, not touching, just suggesting. Her breath left a shadow. The shadow became a door. On the other side was Helgado, frozen grammar incarnate, vaults of translucent frost, shelves made of light, and corridors humming with unsent letters and abandoned promises. At the altar lay a single sheet of ice-thin parchment. Rado's resignation letter. Lost my purpose. Will return when movement means something again. Gudrun frowned. So we're supposed to convince motion it matters? Sigrid nodded. Or remember how to move without bullying the ground. From the shadows stepped Ilva, a Valkyrie whose armor glowed like dawn. If you came for Rado, she said, know this. A rune never abandons, it waits. Then what does it wait for? Sigrid asked. For mortals to walk towards something bigger than themselves. That silence afterward? It wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Sigrid finally smiled. Then that's our direction. Outside, a single snowflake finished falling. The temple bell rang. 3 times, then 4, then just for fun, 5. Bread rose. Songs resumed, and somewhere in the sea, the current whispered continue. Asmund, back at his desk, signed the air with a quill and muttered, accepted as minutes. The morning after the flake finally fell, Skjoldhar was unrecognizably alive. Children ran through snow that still seemed shy about existing, and fishermen shouted half-remembered hymns to the sea. Everything breathed again, awkwardly, yes, but breathing, and that's when the invoice arrived. Not parchment, not messenger. Mist. It slithered up the coast in a low silver fog, curling around Sigrid's cabin door. When she opened it, words formed in the air, drawn in condensation and arrogance. Invoice. 1 return rune. Balance due, equivalent meaning unpaid devotion, and 3 human memories. Department of Cosmic Continuity, Division of Lost Lexicons. Bjorn read over her shoulder and muttered, please tell me this is one of your jokes. It's not mine, Sigrid said, tracing the letters. Helgado never gives gifts. It lends. The mist sighed as if bored. Then it vanished, leaving behind only the faint smell of wet ink and overdue consequences. Gudrun arrived, hammer slung across her back. So what does the world want this time? Sigrid looked out toward the sea. Payment. For what? For existing again? Exactly. Hrock, who had been standing knee-deep in snow, stepped forward with the patience of glaciers. Helgado keeps receipts. When we reopened motion, it reopened its ledgers. Every rune restored expects balance. Bjorn frowned. So it's like divine bookkeeping? Cosmic accounting, said Sigrid. Except the late fees are emotional. By afternoon, the 4 of them sat inside the forge. Outside, snow fell in rhythmic humility, as if practicing not to boast. We can't pay 3 memories, Bjorn said. I'm barely keeping my own in order. It's not just any memories, Hrock replied. They must be shared ones. Moments that define more than one soul. The kind Helgado can store to study what meaning feels like. Gudrun squinted. So it's stealing nostalgia. Sigrid shook her head. No, it's teaching it. Asmund appeared at the doorway, cool behind his ear, the faint smell of punctuation ink trailing him like incense. Ah, you received the invoice, I presume. How do you know? Sigrid asked. He held up his hand, 3 glowing marks of Rado pulsing faintly on his palm, because it charged me interest. Bjorn blinked. Interest? Asmund sighed. You can't just reintroduce verbs into the system without recalibrating conjunctions. Do you realize how many prayers depend on proper grammar? I had monks invoking weather patterns using half a sentence. Sigrid frowned. So what happens if we don't pay? Asmunder's voice lowered. Helgado doesn't punish. It reverts. Meaning unravels. What was learned is unlearned. People forget what continuing feels like. Gudrun exhaled sharply. So we fixed the world, and now we have to pay in memories or lose the concept of tomorrow. Precisely, Asminder said cheerfully. Welcome to creation management. That night, the snow deepened. Sigrid couldn't sleep. The words on the invoice kept replaying behind her eyes. Equivalent meaning. Unpaid devotion. 3 human memories. She walked outside. The moon hung low, pale as unfinished parchment. 3 memories, she murmured. But whose? A voice answered, not a whisper, but a recollection given sound. The first must be a beginning. It was the sea speaking. The second of breaking. The third of becoming. She looked out at the dark water, its surface trembling faintly under starlight. And what happens when we give them away? Then you remember differently. Not comforting, not threatening, just true. In the morning, they packed. No one asked where they were going, because the wind was already pointing the way. To the Valley of Echoes, where memories fossilize themselves into sound. Ilva joined them halfway through the climb, descending from the sky in a flare of silver light. Her armor steamed in the cold. You're late, Gudrun said. I was voting, Ilva replied. The Valkyrie Union had to approve mortal-led metaphysics. Bjorn blinked. You have a union? Of course, she said. Eternal service doesn't mean unpaid overtime. Hrock grinned. What did the vote decide? That I'd rather die again than let the world default on meaning, she said, unsheathing her spear, which hummed softly in agreement. Sigrid nodded. Then we're 5. The Valley of Echoes looked nothing like a valley. It was a chasm carved by resonance, filled not with mist, but with faint shapes of voices. Every shout, laugh, and promise ever made and forgotten. The air shimmered with words that refused to stop existing. Hrock went first, his massive form bending the sound around him. Each echo holds a story. Choose carefully. Helgado will only take those freely given. Bjorn pointed. That one, hear it? That's the sound of the first thaw after the long freeze. My father taught me how to track wind there. Beginning, Sigrid whispered. The first memory. They walked deeper. A cry drifted across the valley, half grief, half defiance. Gudrun froze. That's mine. What is it? Sigrid asked gently. The day I shattered my last sword, Gudrun said. I thought it was failure. It was actually freedom. Breaking, murmured Sigrid. The second memory. Finally, Ilva stopped beside a whisper that pulsed like a heartbeat. I know this one, she said. It's the moment I stopped seeing death as duty. When I realized guiding souls wasn't about order, it was about kindness. Becoming, Sigrid finished. The 3 echoes floated together, forming a spiral of light and sound. Now what? Bjorn asked. Sigrid took a deep breath. Now we give them. The air grew colder. The spiral drifted upward, folding itself into words too ancient for mouths. Then, from the frost above, the shape of Helgado appeared. Not the city this time, but its consciousness. A figure of ice and ink, neither male nor female, neither still nor moving. Its voice carried the resonance of all written things. You bring payment. Sigrid stepped forward. 3 memories freely offered. And meaning, she hesitated, still learning it. That is acceptable. Debt acknowledged. Continuation secured. The valley exhaled. Every echo shuddered, then settled into harmony. Snow began to fall again, steady, graceful, forgiving. Helgado's figure tilted its head. The ledger remains open. Words, once free, demand new guardians. Guardians? Ilva asked. Each rune returned seeks a keeper, one who understands its ache. Sigrid felt the pull before the words were spoken. Rado chooses you. Light coiled around her wrist, burning softly. The mark of the rune etched itself into her skin, glowing like a pulse. Bjorn reached for her. Are you all right? She smiled, half pain, half wonder. I can feel the world moving again. Gudrun exhaled. Then let's keep it that way. When they returned to Skjoldhar, Dawn was waiting like a loyal dog. The bell rang 6 times, paused, then rang once more just to prove it could. Asmundr stood outside the temple, robe wrinkled, quill trembling. You paid the balance? Sigurd nodded. With memories. He smiled softly. A fair trade. After all, the world remembers itself through us. Bjorn looked out toward the horizon. And if more runes go missing, Asmundr's eyes darkened. Then we'll need more listeners and more laughter. The universe has expensive taste. They all laughed. Tired, relieved, human. The wind carried the sound up the cliffs and across the sea. And somewhere beneath the waves, the deep replied, not with rage, not with worship, but with quiet agreement. The world, at last, had rhythm again. But far below, in the cold chambers of Helgado, another scroll unrolled by itself. At the top, written in frost and gold. Next invoice pending. Rune Gibo. Balance of exchange overdue. And somewhere, something ancient smiled. It began with generosity, going sour. Not the big, theatrical kind, the banquet-giving, song-slinging, throw a feast and call it fate kind. No, this was smaller. A neighbor left a loaf on a doorstep, and the crust wrote, "You owe me," in steam. A fisherman mended a net for a cousin, and woke to find a cord tied round his wrist, tugging toward the harbor at every tide as if indebted to the moon. A child lent a toy, and the toy refused to come home. What did you do? Gudrun asked the morning the village woke nodded. Sigrid lifted her sleeve. The rado mark on her wrist glowed a mellow ember. It isn't motion. It's Gibo. She traced a rune in the cold window with her fingertip. Gift. Exchange. The world's grammar for between. Bjorn, who had spent the night cutting 3 invisible strings from his oars, frowned. I thought gifts were simple. They are, Sigrid said, until we start counting. Asmundr appeared with a face like a ledger that had been left out in the rain. Skjoldhar has developed a case of reciprocity with teeth, he announced. Gibo is out of balance. Every offering expects interest. Hrock leaned against the doorframe, thaw steaming off his shoulders. Ice knows that disease. When snow gives water and water gives river and someone dams it for profit, the flow sulks. Solutions? Gudrun asked, already reaching for her hammer, as if she could forge manners back into the world. Asmundr said a brittle smile. The classic cure is pilgrimage to Jafheim. Bjorn tasted the word. Gift home. Home of returned things. Sigrid translated. Because runes tell truths that languages soften. A market under the mountain where every bargain is written twice. The price and what the price does to you. Gudrun grunted. Sounds honest. I hate it already. Ilva landed on the snow with a kiss of silver sparks and the rustle of a union newsletter. The Valkyrie vote was unanimous. We escort. Gifts bind wars and heroes more than swords do. I've seen it. Also, someone keeps leaving me apples with very meaningful bows. I reject edible debts. Then we're 6, Sigrid said, counting wind and thaw as members. Let's go pay what we owe before the bread starts sending invoices. The path to Jafheim ran through the barrow of accounts, a field of low stone mounds where people had once buried their promises under rocks, so they wouldn't blow away. Now the cairns hummed like hives. Snow fell there in exact squares, as if the sky had learned bookkeeping. Halfway across, a knock echoed underfoot. Not wood, not door. Nail. The knock came again, measured, patient, entirely sure of being obeyed. A figure rose in the snow where no figure had been. Narrow as a pin, tall as a mast, armored in overlapping iron plates that clicked softly like abacus beads. Its face was a blank of hammered steel. Where its eyes should be, 2 small heads of forged nails peered out, clever and bright. I am Naegr, it said, voiced the ring of struck metal in a cold room. Binder promises. Auditor of gifts. Enforcer of consequences. This is my barrow. Charmed, said Gudrun, not sounding it. We're headed to Jafheim. Tight schedules, looser morals. Naegr's gaze tilted to Sigurd's wrist, to the low flame of Rado there. The world allowed you motion, it said. Now it demands measure. Gibo is not generosity. Gibo is grammar. For every give, a get. For every get, a give. Balance, Sigurd said. Equivalence, Naig corrected briskly, which is not the same. Balance can be mercy. Equivalence counts ghosts. Bjorn folded his arms. And your purpose? To make sure good intentions do not rot. Its nail eyes clicked. When mortals gift control, I rust them. When they gift to be adored, I loosen them. When they gift to avoid grief, I bend them till they remember why they shook hands. I like you, Ylva said. You do well in a union. I am a union, Naig replied without pride or humor. Of every nail that ever held memory to wood. Proceed. But mind your pockets. Jaffheim returns what you hide. It sank back into the snow, like a law concluding itself. The cairn stopped humming. The wind, relieved, disordered the square snow back into honest chaos. Hrock walked on in thoughtful silence. Useful creature, he rumbled. Unpleasant, but useful. Like braces on a growing jaw. Or commas. Asmundr sighed dreamily. Bless braces. Jaffheim was not a cavern so much as a thesis. The mountain opened like a book, and inside was a market written on ice. Its stalls made of glassy shelves, and its wares the unlikely. Jars of once-kept secrets labeled with date and flavor. Salty, sweet, bitter iron. Baskets of apologies that had been practiced so often they gleamed. Racks of names no one had taken a birth because they were too brave. Now waiting for second chances. Every item had two tags. Price and consequence. Sigurd approached a table stacked with small wooden boxes. Each bore a single rune burned into the lid. Gibo, gift, a sign read, gift boxes for the right kind of empty. Price, one expectation you were proud of. Consequence, your hand will learn to tremble before taking. Bjorn opened his mouth to joke and closed it again. Ylva's armor dimmed slightly, which for a Valkyrie is a sign of respect. Gudrun hovered like a hammer, deciding whether a nail deserves it. Welcome, said the merchant behind the stand, a woman with hair like frost ferns and eyes like receipts. Clear, exacting. I am Marjoff. We do not haggle. We do annotate. What debt did you bring? Sigrid placed a missed invoice from Helgado on the counter. The condensation reformed, obedient as shame. Marjoff scanned it once, twice. Motion restored, now exchange rebuked. The classic order. Very well. The cure for Gibo's bite is clean giving and clean receiving. Most mortals cannot perform either. Teach us, Sigurd said. 3 trials, said Marjoff, and you could hear the capital letters. 1 to give without drafting a leash. 1 to receive without polishing a halo. 1 to trade without turning a person into a price. Succeed, and Gibo will stop charging interest. Fail, and your village will talk itself into a wedding with debt. Where? Bjorn asked. Anywhere, Marjoff said. Jaffheim travels. But start where you're weakest, or the trials will choose for you. Sigrid did not look at anyone when she said, We start with receiving. Asmundr arched an eyebrow, politely weaponized. Personal apprentice? Sigrid shrugged, the motion of someone whose bones had learned to be self-sufficient too early. I know how to give. I'm terrible at being carried. Gudrun's mouth twitched. Miracle, a teenager who knows herself. They returned to Skjoldhar with a gift box Marjoff had pressed into Sigurd's hands. Empty, light, stubborn. The tag wrapped around it read consequence. Your hands will learn to tremble before taking. Sigurd ignored the tag until her hands trembled. Then she read it again and decided prophecy had earned the right to smugness. Marjoff's first trial began the next morning as ordinary as bread. Gudrun brought a loaf to Sigurd's door. No ribbon, no flourish. Just warm crust and the smell of wheat that had obeyed. Take it. I'm not hungry, Sigurd lied. Take it anyway, Gudrun said. It isn't a gift if it has to solve something. The box in Sigurd's palm warmed. Her fingers twitched. Receiving is the art of letting another person be necessary without flinching. It is harder than dragon fighting and offers fewer songs. Sigurd accepted the bread. The invisible cords that had been busy tying every kindness to a claim did not appear. Nothing hooked into her wrist. The air felt clean. Again, said Gudrun, unromantic as sunrise. She set down a second loaf for Bjorn. He took it, then did nothing heroic with it. He did not promise to repay. He did not vow to save Gudrun's future with crumbs. He ate. The village watched, confused. Then they copied. Received without polishing a halo. Ylva reminded them patiently. No speeches. No ledgers. Gratitude without theater. By nightfall, a dozen small exchanges had passed through Skjoldhar without sprouting hooks. The snow that fell on the harbor tasted less of metal. Gibo blinked. The second trial, to give without drafting a leash, was meaner. People love to be kind. They are less fond of discovering how much of their kindness is actually an invoice with decorations. Jafame announced a trial in the way markets do, by changing prices where it hurt. The fishmonger sold his catch for a smile. The smile counted only if it reached his eyes. The blacksmith forged hinges for a grieving widow. The metal would rust if he mentioned it twice. Asmund rewrote a village petition. The ink refused to dry until he confessed he wanted a statue, he confessed. The petition dried. The statue fund vanished without comment. Sigurd's turn came when a storm warning rushed the coast. Bjorn had to take a boat out to drag a net of buoys back from the teeth of the shoals. The storm would rip them free by night. He reached for the oars. "I'll come," Sigurd said. "You don't row," Bjorn said gently. "I'll hold the line," she said, meaning the rope and the stubborn in him. He nodded. "Take the second coil." Out on the water, the sky spoke grammar the sea always understood. Imperative. The waves rose in clauses. The wind edited. Bjorn rowed through commas of spray. Sigurd braced, knuckles chalk white. "Let go," Bjorn said suddenly. "What?" "The line. Give it to the water. It'll take the buoy. It'll save the boat." Sigurd let go, giving without drafting a leash to pull it back later. The rope vanished into gray. The boat didn't capsize. And when the storm passed, the buoy washed ashore of its own accord, as if grateful it hadn't been made into a hostage of good intentions. Back on land, Naegr materialized, nail eyes bright. "Clean give," it said, approval the size of a thumbnail but heavy as iron. 2 of 3. Gudrun mimed saluting with a hammer. Last trial, trade without turning a person into a price. Naegr said, "The market loves to behave like a god. Teach you humility." Markets, to their credit, are quick learners when threatened with irrelevance. Sigurd built a table in the square and wrote Ledger of Living Exchange at the top of a sheet of slate. 2 columns, what changed/what it cost. People came and wrote things like, "I watched an old man's boat while he slept/my afternoon, but I got his dream about a warmer oar handle. I mended a story a widow told/one spool of listening, no receipt. I taught a girl to swear in a kinder way/2 rude words turned to weather." Asmund added, "I corrected 3 love letters/the lovers forgave me anyway. The trick was not free. The trick was full. Exchanges that made more room, not less. Money still moved. Fish still sold. Smiths still charged. But the village began to track what changed as carefully as what cost." Gibo inhaled. Somewhere under the mountain, a rune smiled the way tools do when gripped for their purpose. That night, Marjov stepped out of the lamplight as if the market had sent its emissary to check the till. Trial 3 passed. You have reintroduced grace to exchange. Ylva grinned. "Write that down for the gods." "I do," Marjov said. "They read the footnotes." Naegr's head rose once more from the snow at Sigurd's feet. "Your village will stop tying ropes to kindness," it said. "But there remains one debt the world will not forgive with chores." Everyone waited. Naegr looked at Sigurd, at the faint ember of Rado on her skin. "You must accept a gift you do not want." Sigurd's throat tightened. "That doesn't sound like balance. That sounds like punishment." "It is neither," Naegr said. "It is equivalence correcting pride." Bjorn took a step, then stopped, understanding. The worst gift for a keeper motion who had learned to love being necessary is to be taken out of harness while other hands pull. "What gift?" she asked. Marjov turned her palms up. In them lay a small stone, smooth as a worn idea. It was gray, unremarkable, perfect for skipping across water. A listening stone. Sigurd recognized it immediately. Her mother had carried one like it. It will not amplify your hearing, Marjoff said. It will carry it for a time. You mean, you will not hear runes for 3 days, Marjoff said softly. The stone will listen in your stead. Your village will bring it their needs. They will practice asking without pointing you at every silence like a tool. Sigrid wanted to argue, to demand the world not remove the skill that made her useful, to explain, with scholarly footnotes and righteous italics, that duty is a backbone, not a cage. She took the stone. Her hands trembled. The Rado mark cooled. The world went quiet. Then the quiet became a room she hadn't known she needed. For 3 days, people came. They set their problems beside the stone and found, to their mild alarm and secret pride, that they could hear solutions with their own ears. Mend this. Leave that. Wait. Apologize. Try again. Sleep. Gudrun hammer hinges, because doors deserve open without drama. Bjorn taught 3 teenagers to listen to wind without Sigrid as translator. They were terrible at first and then dangerous in a beautiful way. Ylva drafted a contract between the living and the market. No prices on people. On the 4th morning, the stone warmed and passed the world back. It was different. No louder, no more obedient. Just shared. Listening had learned to be plural. Gibo settled into its rightful place. Not a trap, not a tally, a bridge. When the 6 returned to Jaffame to close the ledger, Marjoff took the missed invoice and pressed it flat between 2 panes of ice. The condensation words dissolved into clear water. Balance paid, she said, with interest and dignity. Naegr, hovering like a footnote too important for the bottom of the page, inclined its nail head. You understand now. Give us a verb that takes 2 lungs. Asmund dabbed at his eyes. All the good verbs do. The market dimmed its lamps in polite applause. Somewhere, deep in Helgado, a shelf labeled Gibo, Resolve account acquired a new jar. Inside, the echo of a village laughing without debt. As they turned to go, Sigrid paused at a stall selling names not taken. One lid bore a simple inscription. Saigr, version where you let someone else speak. She smiled, almost took it, decided to earn it the long way, and left it for later. On the mountain threshold, wind threaded itself through Bjorn's hair and smelled like dry pine and unclaimed horizons. What next? He asked. The way sailors ask maps if they're in the mood to be honest. Asmunderskool scratched nothing and whispered everything. Runes gossip, he said. Iwaz is restless. Endurance, Sigrid said. The you? Standing without stiffening. Hrock flexed fingers thick as good roots. I like that one. Careful, Ylva said, smiling sideways. Iwaz teaches a difference between surviving and calcifying. From the snow behind them came a soft thunk. No nail this time, but wood. Naegr had left a single iron spike half buried by the path, head up, gleaming like a star that had learned about labor. On it, very tiny, someone had scratched 2 runes. And receipt and warning, Asmund said, paid and pending. They walked home under a sky that had rediscovered the dignity of staying up there. The Rado mark on Sigrid's wrist pulsed in slow contentment. The skin below it ached with a familiar, beloved way to being part of more than one sentence at a time. Skjoldhar's roof smoked a kind of smoke that means soup. Children argued about nothing with elation. The temple bell tried a whimsy and rang prime numbers on purpose. The wind, show off, harmonized. That night, when a village slept, the seam, the one the sea keeps between world and other world, twitched once, like a page deciding whether to turn. Elsewhere in Helgado's vaults, a new form stirred. Ensa's, the rune of true speech, cleared its throat like a poet who has watched too much politics. It would have its due, but that would be later. For now, the bread did not send invoices. The nets did not pull wrist to sea. A loaf on a doorstep stayed a loaf and not a leash. And a girl who listened stones learned that sometimes the bravest rune is thank you, drawn without a pen, left without a string, spoken without fear of what it can never buy. It started with trees refusing to die properly. They had the decency to look dead, black branches, brittle bark, roots that creaked when stepped on. But if you listened, and of course Sigrid did, you could hear the problem. They were still breathing. Slowly, stubbornly, against the grain of their own season. "The forest sulking," Bjorn muttered, running a hand along one trunk. It hummed like a sigh. "Not sulking," Sigurd said. "Practicing." "For what?" "For not giving up. The trees we use, the keepers of Aiwaz, rune of endurance. In the old days, Aiwaz lived happily in their rings, teaching mortals how to bend instead of break. But lately, bending had gone out of style. Everyone wanted to stand straight, unyielding, noble, and eventually snapped. Even gods. Asmund arrived carrying an expression you could shell books on. "Aiwaz has left its vessels," he said. "The rune's concept has gone feral. People confuse endurance with denial, patience with paralysis." Gudrun folded her arms. "So it's gone on strike like Rado and Gibo." "Not quite," said Asmundr. "Aiwaz hasn't left. It's hiding, waiting for the world to remember the difference between surviving and living long enough to start over." Sigrid brushed her fingers across a yew trunk. The bark vibrated faintly. "Then it's waiting for forgiveness." "Whose?" Bjorn asked. "The kind we never give ourselves," she said. That night, the forest began whispering in its sleep. Not leaves, not wind, rings. The yews remembered centuries the way storytellers remember applause, lovingly and with edits. The sound came like a pulse through the soil. Einar. This saga had enough fishermen already. Bjorn sat by the campfire sharpening a blade that no longer needed sharpening. "We're supposed to listen to trees now?" he asked. "Yes," Sigurd said. "They've been listening to us for millennia. It's polite." "Polite gets you killed," Gudrun grumbled. "Impolite gets you forgotten," Sigurd shot back. Asmundr smirked. "Our apprentice has discovered rhetoric." "She discovered exhaustion," Ylva corrected, stretching her wings beside the fire. "They sound the same in Heroes." Hrock the thawed giant leaned close, his breath steaming faintly. "The yew's problem is simple. It survives everything. Fire, frost, grief. After a few centuries of that, it forgets why it bothers." Sigurd looked up. "So we teach endurance to hope again." "No," Hrock said. "We teach hope to rest." In the morning, they found the heart tree, old enough to predate apologies. Its bark was a mosaic of centuries, carved and recarved by gods, mortals, and occasionally poets. At its base, the earth opened like a mouth frozen mid-prayer. Sigurd approached. The air around the tree pulsed in time with her heartbeat. "Aiwaz," she said softly, tracing the rune in the air like a path. "If you're listening, the world needs you." The silence that answered was not empty. It was thinking. Then a voice emerged, not booming, not divine, just tired. "The world does not need me. It needs to stop using me as armor." Sigurd froze. "You're angry?" "I'm bored," said the voice. "They call me strength, but all they mean is refusal. They plant my trees in graveyards and call it reverence. They tattoo me on warriors and call it virtue. I was meant to teach movement within stillness, not pride and paralysis." Bjorn whistled softly. "You sound like every retired blacksmith I know." The tree groaned, a sound somewhere between laughter and roots cracking. "Mortals have forgotten how to yield." Sigurd stepped closer. "Then teach us again." "I would, if someone remembered how to ask without demanding." She hesitated, then bowed her head. "Please." The ground shuddered. Bark split just slightly, enough to reveal the red gleam of living wood beneath. From it emerged a small branch, curved like a question mark. Aiwaz had given her a test. They camped by the heart tree for 3 days. Every dawn, Sigurd woke to find the branch in a new shape. Sometimes an arc, sometimes a spiral, sometimes a circle that refused to close. Each form seemed to hum a different lesson. On the first day, the rune taught persistence. The branch resisted her attempts to carve it, softening when she pressed too hard. "Endurance isn't force," she muttered, frustrated. "It's patience." On the second day, it taught pain. When Bjorn reached for the branch to help, it burned him, not cruelly but instructively. "Some burdens can't be shared," he said through gritted teeth. "Then what's the point?" Gudrun snapped. To learn where help ends, Sigrid said quietly, wrapping the branch in cloth. On the third day, it taut release. The branch fell still, pulseless, ordinary would again. When Sigrid tried to wake it, nothing happened. Asmundr tilted his head. It's waiting for the question you haven't asked. What question? The one that hurts. Sigrid closed her eyes. If endurance isn't holding on, what is it? The branch stirred. The grain rippled. A single rune formed in its wood. And then, in her mind, the answer, staying soft enough to begin again. That night, snow fell heavy and silent. The group sat around their fire, listening to the forest breathe. Ylva stared into the flames. So endurance isn't strength. It's grace under repetition, Sigrid said. Then why does it feel like weakness? Gudrun asked. Because we only honor what hurts loudly, Asmund replied. Bjorn poked the fire. And what about you? Got a punctuation. What does endurance look like in words? He smiled faintly. A comma. It lets the sentence rest without ending. Sigrid laughed softly. That's perfect. It's syntax, he said, deadpan. Perfection is accidental. The branch glowed faintly beside her. Aiwaz was listening, amused. By dawn, something had changed. The yews no longer looked dead. They looked deliberate. Frost clung to them like jewelry instead of chains. The forest pulsed with quiet confidence, each tree standing not against the wind but with it. Sigrid felt the difference under her feet. The world had exhaled, slowly, gratefully. Then the snow shifted. A figure emerged from the tree lean. A woman tall as twilight, her hair made of bark, her eyes green as moss under ice. She moved with the rhythm of growth in slow motion. I am Ursa the Ring's first child to you, she said. Her voice creaked like with bending but not breaking. You woke my kin. Sigrid bowed. We only asked them to stop pretending they were gone. Ursa smiled. A crack that lets sunlight through. That's all life ever asks. She looked at the others, especially Bjorn. You carry storms in your lungs. Why have you screamed them out? Bjorn blinked. That's private. Endurance is never private, Ursa said. It's contagious. The world copies what we refuse to heal. Then she turned to Sigrid. You carry Rado and Gibo already. Their fire and their fairness. Will you carry Aiwaz too? Sigrid hesitated. It's heavy. So is mercy, Ursa said. But you seem fond of that. The rune burned into Sigrid's palm. Faint but steady, a vertical line with small hooks at either end. When it finished searing, the forest sighed, and Ursa vanished into the roots. When they left the forest, the wind had learned restraint. It blew in pulses rhythmic, like a heart rediscovering its beat. Gudrun stretched her shoulders. I liked her. She liked you too, Ylva said. She almost called you a compliment. Bjorn grinned. We survived another rune. What's next, apprentice? Sigrid looked at the horizon, where dawn split the clouds like ink through snow. And Suz, she said softly, truthful speech. The world been holding its tongue too long. Asmundr chuckled. Then sharpen your words, mortals. The next one bites. And far below them, beneath ice and memory, something began to stir. The old breath of lies, stretching after a very long nap, wondering who had given mortals permission to speak without supervision. The world trembled, not in fear, but in anticipation, because endurance had finally remembered its purpose. And truth was listening. It began with words refusing to sit where they were put. Not rebellion, more like fatigue. Nouns slid an inch to the left to lean against verbs. Adjectives wandered off to stare at rivers. Prepositions, those tiny, stubborn bridges, trembled over chasms they'd spanned for centuries and demanded railings. Even a village sign that said Welcome T.O. Skjoldhar blinked twice and rearranged itself to welcome while you are honest. That's new, Bjorn said, passing under with the guilty grace of a man who occasionally tells the wind he'll be right back. It's Ansuz, Sigrid murmured. The rune of speech that means what it says. She drew it on the fog glass of Gudrun's forge window, a spear breath, a mouth shaped around a promise. Speech is cheap, Gudrun said, hammering. Meaning's expensive. Asmund arrived with ink on his sleeves and a look that suggested language had filed for divorce. The town is experiencing semantic slippage, he announced. Words are attempting to return to their original owners. Who owns words? Ylva asked, landing in the doorway with the quiet rustle of discipline. Asmund sighed. Usually the listener. Outside, a child tried to ask for a cookie and produce a confession about rocks. Somewhere in the harbor, a sailor apologized to a rope and meant it in a way that made him sit down. Hrock the thawed giant trudged by, each footstep unfreezing a syllable in the road. The thaw spelled enough and then politely melted. Sigrid placed her palm over the Ansuz rune on the window. It warmed with a breath that wasn't hers. Truth is bleeding, she said softly. Good, Gudrun said. Maybe it'll scab into manners. Truth doesn't scab, Bjorn said. It lingers. It chooses, Ylva added. I've seen men try to speak at the moment of death, and the words took one look at their mouths and refused to ride. Asmund clapped his hands once. Educational as this is, we're about to have a village-wide crisis. Contracts are unbinding. Oaths are demanding retroactive sincerity. The marriage of Torvald and Torvald, yes, both of them, has paused until they figure out which of them promise to change and which promise to be patient. Where do we fix it? Sigurd asked. He pointed north, toward the cliff where rafts of cloud came to think. The breathing stone, he said, and Suz was carved there when language first struck wind, and called it kin. If any place remembers how to keep speech honest without making it cruel, it's that rock. Gudrun slung her hammer. Ylva adjusted her pauldron. Bjorn pocketed 3 spare silences and a coil of patience. Sigrid tightened the scarf around her throat, because some pilgrimages require you to respect your own breath. They climbed while the sky practiced whether in conditional tense. The path was a rib of ancient basalt, slick with the memory of storms. At the top stood a flat black slab ringed with runic scars. It hummed not like stone, but like vowels warming up. The breathing stone, Asmund said reverently. Here, ere learned that meaning rides were free. The slab inhaled when they stepped close. Not a metaphor. It inhaled, and the world leaned in. Sigrid placed both hands on it. It was cold the way truth is cold. Not unkind, just uninterested in flattery. Ansuz, she said, we need you in the world, but we need people to survive you. The stone answered in the only language it trusted. Breath. A slow exhale washed over them, a wind with a mind. It smelled like pine sap, snow glare, old books, and the first word a child ever says when no one's prompting them. Speak, the wind said, but be held to it. What does that mean? Bjorn asked, squinting. It means we don't get to treat words like costumes anymore, Sigrid said. If we put a sentence on, it wears us back. Mortals dislike being worn, Ylva remarked. Mortals dislike being naked more, Gudrun countered. Bring it. The wind settled into something like a voice without throat. A trial, then 3 breaths. 1 to reveal, 1 to refuse, 1 to repair. Pass, and I'll stay where you set me. Fail, and I'll return to the mouths that can carry me. Who's first? Asmund rasped, too quickly for a bystander. Gudrun's chin rose. I am, she said, and stepped forward, because blacksmiths are allergic to hypocrisy. The breath of reveal. The wind lifted the edges of her words like a smith lifts metal to the light. Say something, Sigrid whispered. Gudrun sighed. I make weapons, so I don't have to use them. Her mouth formed the truth. It left her and hung in the air, visible as condensation. The words rotated, showing all sides. 2 of them looked like lies from certain angles. The wind corrected them. I make doors because I'm afraid of walls, Gudrun amended, and the air softened. The breath of refusal. The wind pressed her throat. Say what you will not say. Gudrun struggled. Refusal is a skill most confused with silence. I will not promise to fix grief, she said at last. I will stand beside it and bring nails. The wind approved. It always approves of accurate limits. The breath of repair. The wind cooled. Now speak something broken back into use. Gudrun looked at her own hands. I forgive the hammer for being louder than me, she said, and her voice stopped fighting its echo. The stone hummed. The trial passed. Show off, Bjorn muttered, smiling like a bruise healed right. Your turn, sailor, Ylva said. Bjorn stepped to the stone. The wind tilted its head. If wind had heads. Reveal. I leave, so people won't see me needing them, he said, surprised at how quickly it came. Refusal. I will not pretend the wind is an excuse, he said, and the breeze actually laughed. A brief, delighted gust. Repair. He looked at Sigrid, then away, then back. I will learn to return before the story does it for me. The cliff accepted him. Somewhere down in Skjoldhar a rope untied itself and waited on a hook without sulking. Asmundr, Sigrid prompted. He fluffed his robe and took position like a semicolon correcting a paragraph. Reveal. I love rules because they hold me together, he said, and his voice lost 10 years of pomp and gained 5 of mercy. Refusal. I will not use grammar to make grief behave, he said. The wind underlined it. Repair. I will write prayers with commas, he whispered, so the living can breathe. The wind kissed his forehead for good punctuation. Ylva went next, fierce and unblinking. Reveal. I keep the brave alive in stories because I am afraid of who I was before heroics. Refusal. I will not call dying a lesson. Repair. I will escort the living back to their kitchens. The breathing stone glowed faintly, as if fire had learned to be thoughtful. Hrock stepped forward last among the companions, though not the last trial. Reveal. I melt what pretends it cannot change. Refusal. I will not be ashamed of softening. Repair. I will teach rivers how to carry names without drowning them. The wind tasted of river mud and blessings. Then it was Sigrid's turn. Ansuz waited, a patient hunter who prefers prey that volunteers. She placed both palms on the stone. Reveal was easy and therefore terrifying. I listen because I am afraid of speaking first, she said. The admission crawled out of her mouth like a shy animal and sat between them, blinking. Refusal tightened her throat. I will not use truth to punish, she said, and trembled at how much she had sometimes wanted to. Repair came like a door she never dared to open. I will speak before I am asked, once a day, something that frees us both. The wind rose and circled her, knotting itself lightly around her wrists, her chest, her jaw, gentle restraints, like bandages made of breath. Keep it, Ansuz said, not as chains, as reminders. The rune burned, not on her palm this time, but at the hollow of her throat. It healed immediately, leaving behind the faintest mark, like an extra punctuation the body had been waiting for. Below, Skjoldhar exhaled with them. Sentences stopped activating traps. Odes resumed, humbler. The sign at the village gate, simplified to welcome. Tell the truth you can bear. Is that it? Bjorn asked. We passed. The wind was not done. A last breath for the village, not the heroes. It flowed past them, down the path, across roofs, through windows and doorways, into kitchens and over beds. It entered mouths and left warmth. People woke in their own houses feeling, abruptly, honest. A mother told her son she had been hard because fear was a bad teacher. A shopkeeper admitted prices had been cruel during lean months and nailed a new sign. Fair again. 2 Torvalds discovered they had promised the same thing and finally laughed. Words returned to where they'd always wanted to live, not on banners, but between people. And Suz will stay, Asmundr said quietly, watching the breath work like a retired priest watches whether that is decided to be kind. But it has a price. Of course it does, Gudrun said. Everything that matters does. The price is appetite, Asmundr said. Now that the word is honest, people will crave it. They will gnaw at each other with sincerity. They will confuse bluntness with bravery. They will need moderation. Then we teach moderation, Ylva said, and practice regret. Regret is a muscle, Hrock rumbled. It grows with use. Sigrid looked at the boys on the ridge, throwing words like snowballs and wincing when they hit too hard. We'll make a school, she said, a place to sit with a sentence until it chooses kindness. Asmundr's eyes sparkled. I have chalk. Gudrun, I have benches. Bjorn, I'll bring wind that doesn't interrupt. Ylva, I'll bring threshold that let apologies through. Rock, I'll bring water for cooling hot mouths. The breathing stone hummed approval and went quiet. Not gone, simply resting like lungs between choruses. They descended. By the time they reached Joldhar, the first class had gathered without needing to be called. A ring of neighbors, some curious, some ashamed, some angry in the way people are when they realize they've been starving for something that grows in their own kitchens. Sigurd set the rule on the board. Truth serves relationship or it does not serve. Beneath it, Asmundr drew a comma and a cup. Here, Sigurd said, voice steady. We breathe before we speak. We put weight under our words. We let them sit in our mouths until they warm enough not to cut. If they still cut, a woman asked, then we bring towels, Gudrun said, dropping a stack on a bench. And they did. They practiced. They failed. They apologized. They tried again. The school rang with ugly truths made gentle by purpose. Pretty lies turned into compost, and the sturdy music of people deciding not to be clever at the cost of being kind. That night, as the lamps went out, Sigrid sat alone on the threshold and listened to the village murmur, a sound she knew intimately and still loved anew. Bjorn settled beside her, not quite touching. You're speaking more, he said. I promised, she answered. It helps, he said. Me too, she admitted. They watched Frost begin to write on the roof tiles. The script was slow, honest. The kind of sentence you can sleep under. Somewhere distant, beyond Helgado's coal stacks, something woke. Something that liked words best when they carried knives. It tasted the air and snarled. Truth, it decided, had gotten uppity. Fear would have to remind the world who funds most alphabets. But that would be later. For now, the sign at Skjoldhar's gate slept, and in its sleep it dreamed a shorter message still. 5 letters that even winter could hold without breaking. Welcome. It began with luck getting audited. Not the small luck, lost mittens found under stoves, fish biting because someone sang off-key, but the heavy kind that bends roads and puts strangers in the same trouble at the right time. That luck pulled its cloak up to its chin and refused to leave the house. Dice cups went quiet in taverns. Midwives could not predict which cry would be first or last. Hunters loosed arrows and found trees in a way that had not been there to blink before. Sigurd woke to a village walking carefully, as if the ground had misplaced its sense of humor. Perthro, she said, before the kettle boiled. The dice cup, chance. Bjorn was already tying useless knots in a piece of line, the way sailors pray when they don't want to look like they are. Storms hate being scheduled. Maybe luck does too. Asmundr bustled in with frost on his eyebrows and a scroll that hadn't existed yesterday. Notice of randomness reassessment, he read, affronted by the phrasing. Filed by Helgado, countersigned by the loom, co-signed by... Oh, excellent. The Guild of Prophets who swear they're only interpreting. Gudrun planted her hammer on the table like punctuation. Translation? Helgado is investigating whether prophecy had been skimming certainty off the top, Asmundr said. Perthro claims unfair competition. Ilva landed in the doorway, helm under one arm, a thin smile under stricter laws. We voted. The Valkyrie Union supports chance. Fights decided before they start are just funerals with costumes. Hrock ducked to enter, brushing thaw from his shoulders. Ice loves chance. It likes to crack where arrogance stands. Sigurd poured tea and frowned at the scroll. Where do we go? Asmundr pointed toward the cliffs where ravens rehearse inevitability. The House of Perhaps. It stood there before foretelling learned to charge admission. The House of Perhaps looked like a decision that had grown walls. One door, many windows, none matching, all ajar. A sign hung crookedly over the lintel. Enter if you can bear not knowing. The paint peeled in places that suggested intentional ambiguity. Inside, the floor was a scatter of carved bone, dice, knuckle bones, bits of antler, and every step made a soft cell sound, as if walking across the alphabet when it hasn't chosen a language yet. On a central table sat a black cup, simple and shadow-deep, rim worn from centuries of hands. Perthro, Sigurd whispered. The cup tipped a fraction toward her. No voice, only a click like 2 pebbles deciding to be friends. Asmundr cleared his throat. On behalf of Skjoldhar, we contest a halt on luck. People are bruising their foreheads on certainty and its absence. The cup considered, which is to say, nothing happened for a duration that taught everyone patience. Then the bones on the table rattled their own accord, climbed politely into the cup, and hid. A breathless, theatrical hush fell. Even Ilva bowed to performance. Test the silence said. 3 throws. 1 to risk. 1 to lose. 1 to learn. You will not choose the stakes. Bjorn grimaced. Nothing is worse than a game where the house writes the rules while you play. That's called life, Gudrun said. We're already gambling. Sigrid put her hand on the cup. It was cool, honest. She imagined it full of river stones in childhood. Per throw, she said, we accept. First throw, risk. The dice spilled like small white weather, skittered, stopped. On 1 bone, a runic pip glowed faintly. Price. Choose 1 certainty, to set down for a day. The room waited. Bjorn was first. I set down the path home, he said, voice steady. Let the wind decide today. Gudrun nodded. I set down the tool. I always reach for first. Ilva stared at the rafters. I set down the posture that wins every argument. Hrock smiled slowly. I set down the habit of being the heaviest in the room. Asmundr exhaled as if removing a corset made of grammar. I set down the rule that requires rules. Sigrid swallowed. I set down the belief that listening is safer than speaking. The bones warmed under their palms, as if pleased by the taste of surrendered certainty. Outside, the light shifted. The snow on the sill drew curves at random, beautiful and slightly insulting to planners. Now what? Bjorn asked. Now we walk through a day without our favorite armor, Sigrid said, and see if our skin remembers how to like weather. They did. Bjorn sailed without a route and found a school of fish exactly where no map would have dared admit. Gudrun put down the hammer and fixed the door with her hands and a lullaby. The door, flattered, stopped sticking. Ilva closed her wings in a debate and let silence carry half her case. The council agreed out of relief. Hrock sat on a hillside and refused to be heavy. The slope confessed it had been afraid of avalanches and softened. Asmundr watched a child break 3 grammatical laws and assemble a poem from the wreckage that made him weep for the right reason. Sigrid spoke first once, stay, and a frightened mare stopped before it ran off the cliff of its own panic. Night found them changed, not improved, tenderized. Per throw purred like stones in a cup. Second throw, lose. The bones leapt and landed in a cross. The cup deepened, as if dropping a floor. Price. Give something back that chance gave you. The room tightened. Gifts received without hooks are the hardest to surrender. Bjorn looked at his hands. The certainty that the wind loves me best, he said. Let flirt elsewhere. Gudrun flexed her jaw. The story where strength equals worth. Ilva nodded once, a movement like unsheathing a gentler weapon. The myth that victory is the only kind of honor. Hrock's mouth tilted. The pleasure of ending every argument by being louder. Asmundr's ink-stained fingers trembled. The illusion that I am necessary when I am only correct. Sigrid closed her eyes. The gift chance had brought her was small and luminous. The feeling of being the one everyone needed in a crisis. I give back the role of savior, she said, and the admission was a cut that did not bleed but stung as if truth were salt. Outside, the weather shrugged. Somewhere a hunter missed a shot and did not starve. Somewhere a stranger arrived late and met a better kindness. Somewhere a prophecy tripped on its own certainty and learned to limp beautifully. Per throw was silent a long time, which is the cup's version of applause. Third throw, learn. The bone spooled out, rolled, stopped, then rolled again as if reconsidering. 3 showed nothing, blank faces. 3 showed crowded pips. Too much. The cup's rim shimmered like heat. Lesson, luck is a commons. Stop grazing it like kings. Asmundr inhaled sharply. Explain, he demanded, and immediately regretted his tone to a rune famous for mood. The bones rearranged to form a single word. Every pip a letter. Share. Sigrid understood first. We've been treating chance like private property, she said. Saving our luck for ourselves. Hoarding coincidence. Rigging mercy. Stacks the deck, Gudrun muttered. Breaks a table, Bjorn added. Ilva closed her eyes. Cost the dead too much. Hrock pressed his palm to the floor. And the land. Perthro rattled with approval. The house are perhaps brightened by one honesty. Then we create a practice, Sigurd said, suddenly certain in the way storms are certain they're not at fault. A potluck for luck. Asmundr blinked. What? Everyone in Skjoldhar brings one small chance they don't need today, Sigurd said, speaking faster now, as if being chased by a useful idea. We pool it. We redistribute to the people who are drowning, by lottery, not favor. Chance is mutual aid, Ilva said, smiling like a knife that finally remembers it was forged for bread. Perthro will like it, Hrock rumbled. It respects the river. Gudrun scratched her chin. Rules. Asmundr perked up. I can help. Simple ones, Sigurd said, counting on fingers. No saving luck for later. No earmarking for friends. No buying extra. No pity. No purity tests. And who draws? Bjorn asked. The person who needs it, Sigurd said. And if they're too proud to admit it, their neighbor speaks for them. They looked to the cup. The bones hummed. The dice tipped, as if nodding. By sunset the square was loud with the hush of people deciding to trust each other. The luck pot, a bowl of polishu, donated by the forest like a quiet benediction, sat on a table beneath the temple bell. People lined up, holding small offerings of chance, a coin found on a road, a narrow mist told with gratitude, not boasting, a run of good sleep someone could spare a night of, a hunch that tasted generous. They dropped each into the bowl with a murmur for whoever needs it next. Asmund recorded nothing but smiles, which are notoriously difficult to forge. Ilva enforced a single rule. Anyone mocking the line had to donate a private risk. Gudrun fixed the foot of the table so it didn't wobble under hope. Hrock kept the snow off with a glance. Bjorn taught 3 boys to shuffle fairly. Sigurd watched. That is, she listened with her eyes. The first draw went to a widow whose roof liked to collapse on storms. She pulled from the bowl a luck that tasted like today the wind will change 1 minute sooner. It did, and her rafters groaned with relief instead of splinters. The second went to the fishmonger's apprentice, who drew do not forget the second knot, and didn't and kept his boat. The third went to the child with the stutter, who drew the teacher will understand first time. And she did, and they both cried in the way that waters fields. Perthro's cup arrived without being carried, and sat quietly at the edge of the square, like a satisfied cat. By midnight, Skjoldhar had a new habit. Helgado noticed. Of course it did. Its ledgers like to be surprised by good news. It sent a single line of miss across the square. No invoice this time, only a receipt. Perthro, balance adjusted. Status, cooperative. Note, prophecy audited. Forecast to include margins. Asmundr read it aloud and bowed to the air with the old grace of priests who know whom they serve, everyone. Margins, he murmured. Finally, Sigurd felt the new weight at her throat. The faint glow of Ansuz, and the steady warmth on her wrist from Rado and Gibo, and the hidden thrum of Aiwaz in her palm. A chord of runes. A grammar of living. Is that it? Bjorn asked, and the wind laughed gently at him for ever asking that. The house had perhaps darkened. The bones stilled. Perthro's cup tilted toward the sea. One more throw, the silence said. Not for chance. For fear. The bones scratched across the table, as if writing with their own edges. They spelled a single rune none of them wanted as their next assignment. Nothis. Need. Necessity. The friction that lights the match, and the rope that burns the hands that pull it. Ilva lowered her helm. Nothis will strip us. It will also close someone else, Hrock said, practical as thaw. Gudrun rolled her shoulders. We have nails. Asmundr gathered his quill. And commas. Bjorn checked the knots. And time. Sigrid touched the cup. It felt like the underside of courage. And breath, she said. They left the house of perhaps to the ravens, and inevitable. The square slept. The luck pot glowed faintly as if learning the names of those who would need it tomorrow. The sea practiced being less cruel to boats. On the path home, Frost wrote a sentence on the stones in a hand Sigrid didn't recognize, but trusted anyway. You cannot own the wind. You can only take turns." She smiled. Chance had found its manners again. And far to the north, where cliffs keep secrets even from storms, something thin and necessary opened its eyes for first time in too long. Nothes tasted the air in the village in the new habit of sharing, and decided to arrive hungry, as was right. The first frost came late, so late that people had begun to joke about it. They called it the shy winter, the vacationing cold, the season that forgot its job. But when it arrived with intent. Snow didn't fall, it descended. The air folded inward, compacting sound, until even laughter froze mid-breath. Skjoldhar woke to find the world remade in one color: silence. Sigrid was first to rise. Her window pane had cracked from the chill, a thin white scar across glass. The crack hummed faintly, like a string tuned too high. She touched it and winced. "It's awake," she murmured. Bjorn grumbled from the hearth. "What is—" "The rune we were warned about." He sat up, hair pointing north-south in treason. "Oh, good. I was worried things were becoming peaceful." By noon, the frost had reached the bones of the houses. Doors refused to close, then refused to open. Even the fire hesitated, its flames shivering like guilty witnesses. The luck pot in the square dimmed. Smoke froze mid-curl and hung in the air, undecided. Asmund read aloud from a page that wrote itself while he blinked. Nothes has risen. All that is surplus will be tested. All that is hidden will hunger. Perfect, Ylva said dryly, a god with a taste for balance sheets. Gudrun threw another log on the fire. It cracked, sighed, and burned blue. "So what now?" "We pray." Sigrid shook her head. "We work." Nothes doesn't want worship. It wants honesty. Hrock frowned. "And what does honesty cost?" Sigrid met his eyes. "Everything you hoard and pretend is virtue." That evening, they gathered in the square. The village looked smaller in the frost, like humility had tightened its belt. Even the sky hung lower, as if eavesdropping. The luck pot was buried beneath a thin layer of ice. Sigrid knelt and brushed it clean. The bowl glowed faintly, defiant but fragile. "We share what we have," she said. "The rune won't stop until we do." A voice answered her, smooth, cold, precise. "You speak for comfort, not truth." The air shimmered, and from it stepped a figure draped in frost. Nothes did not look like hunger. It looked like the moment before you admit it. Tall, angular, clothed in rags woven from unfinished promises. Its eyes glowed dull red, like embers surviving the ash. Bjorn muttered, "Couldn't the runes ever arrive looking friendly?" "No," Asmund said. "That would defeat the purpose." Sigrid rose to face it. "You've come to test us." "To measure," said Nothes. Its voice sounded like rope tightening. "Need has been misused. You speak of fairness, yet you keep your comfort quiet. You give what you can spare, not what you fear losing." Gudrun stepped forward. "We gave our luck. Luck is luxury." The frost figure raised a hand. The air split, revealing scenes like shards of mirror. The widow who stood extra wood under a bed, the fisherman who sold his best catch to strangers first, the children who shared songs but not shoes. The crowd murmured. Shame is colder than wind. Sigrid clenched her jaw. "So, what do you want from us?" Nothes looked at her, as one looks at a lie politely waiting to die. "Want," it echoed. "I do not want. I remind, want is yours. You confuse it with need." The rune raised its hand. The frost deepened. Fires dimmed to coals. The breath of every villager hung midair, forming glowing threads between them. Thin, trembling, alive. "Each thread," said Nothes, "is what you owe another. Pull too hard, it breaks. Hold too loosely, it strangles." Bjorn whispered, "This is insane." "No," Sigrid said softly. "It's inventory." One by one, the villagers saw their threads tighten or slacken. The widow's line stretched toward the orphan twins who lived 2 doors away. Gudrun's thread connected to Carpenter, whose roof she'd ignored repairing. Even Asmunder's quill glowed faintly, linking him to the people who read his words but not his silences. Sigrid looked down. Her thread wasn't one. It was many, tangled, glowing like veins of magma under skin. Each ran toward someone she'd spoken to, listened to, helped, or failed. She'd thought mercy was infinite. Now she saw it was inventory, too. Nalthis smiled faintly. You cannot heal what you won't admit you need. Need is not shame. It is structure. Ylva stepped forward. And what if we have nothing left? The rune turned toward her, slow and deliberate. Then you ask. That broke the crowd's last defense. For years, they'd survived by trading pride like currency. To ask was to surrender, and surrender was a foreign tongue. But the frost kept deepening, and silence was a terrible mirror. It was Sigrid who spoke first. She took off her gloves and set them on the ground. I can bear cold, she said. Someone else can't. The widow followed, placing her last loaf beside them. Bread grows back. Children don't. Gudrun hesitated, then removed the small iron ring she wore on a chain. For the smith with no hammer, she said. Bjorn looked at the fire dying in the center of the square and sighed. Fine. He tore off his coat. For whoever's colder than I pretend to be. One by one, the villagers came forward, offering small pieces of what comfort remained, until the pile of gifts looked absurd in its variety. Fish, wool, candles, maps, a song half sung, even silence held with reverence. Nalthis watched. The frost around it began to melt, not from heat, but from recognition. Need, it said softly, is not poverty. It is proof. Proof of what? Sigrid asked. That you are not alone. The rune reached out a hand toward the luck pot. The ice shattered, revealing the bowl glowing again, brighter than before. It pulsed in rhythm with the villagers' breathing, steady, shared, unafraid. Nalthis' form flickered. Its ember eyes dimmed. The test is not over, it said. But you remember how to begin. The air warmed. The fire in the square reignited on its own, orange instead of blue. For the first time since the frost's arrival, the smoke rose. Bjorn rubbed his arms. So that's it? We share and freeze together. Sigrid smiled, teeth white against the dark. No, we burn together. That's the difference. The rune tilted its head, almost amused. You speak truth now. Keep it. And then Nalthis dissolved into light, scattering into 1,000 tiny sparks that landed on each villager's skin and vanished, leaving behind a faint warmth that would not fade. That night, Skjoldhar glowed faintly from within. Fires burned cleaner, slower. No one slept alone. Asmundr wrote by candlelight. Need is not the wound, it's the seam. Gudrun hammered warmth into iron again. Ylva took her first rest in weeks, trusting the others to watch. Bjorn laughed at something small and human. Sigrid sat outside, listening to the quiet between heartbeats, knowing it was temporary and sacred. She whispered to the night, "What's next?" The wind answered softly, not cruelly, "Hagalaz, the storm." She smiled, "Then we'll bring the fire." And high above, in the hollow between constellations, the gods, what few remained, watched a village that had learned to share hunger and thought. Perhaps for the first time, that survival looked suspiciously like grace. It did not begin with thunder. It began with a grammar error in the sky, an M dash where a comma should have been, a long, unbreathable pause that made the horizon hold its jaw too tight. The clouds bunched not in layers, but in clauses, stacked meaning on meaning, until the air itself forgot how to parse. "Hagalaz," Sigrid said, before the first hailstone fell. The breaker, the punctuation you feel in your teeth. Bjorn tasted the wind and grimaced. "It's sharp." "Good," Gudrun muttered, setting a bundle of iron bells on the table. "Sharp tools are honest." Asmundr rifled through a sheaf of pages that insisted on reordering themselves by urgency. To review, since we will shortly forget how to listen, Hagalaz is not a tantrum. It is structural. It destroys where denial has load-bearing status. Translation, Ylva said, tightening her gauntlets. "It smashes what we are pretending we can keep," Asmundr replied. Hrock, steaming faintly in the doorway, sniffed. "The ice approves." The first stone struck the roof, a white knuckle rapping a door intended to remove. Then another and another, until the village sounded like 1,000 hard truths knocking at once. Sigrid pulled her cloak close. We prepared. We prepared, Bjorn echoed, and hoped they had. Hagalaz does not arrive to punish. It arrives to edit. It peeled the rot from beams and left them raw. It cracked the abandoned ore and spared the one repaired 3 times. It dented the temple bell exactly where pride had made it ring hollow. The new tone was humbler, deeper, better. It punched through a window where secrets had been stored in jars, without labels, and left a clean smell of wet stone. Inventory, Sigrid said, squinting into the white. But fast. Skjoldhar moved like a sentence refusing to be run on. The luck pot, sheathed in frost but glowing stubborn, was carried under the eaves of the schoolhouse. The need pile became 3 piles. Now, soon we may not need this after all. Gudrun and the other smiths hung their iron bells from the rafters and over doorways. When hail struck them, the bells sang resonant notes that made the stones ricochet, not shatter. Why, bells! A boy shouted over the din. Because chaos keeps time, Gudrun yelled back. If you give it a meter, it chooses a dance. Ylva moved from roof to roof without wings, just hands, just rope. Valkyries know how to escort the living too. She clipped lines across alleys, so neighbors could cross the air without faith falling out of their pockets. Hrock stood in the square and lifted his palms. What a hail meant to pulverize the cobbles. It found melt, turning into slush, then water, then a stream that remembered the river's path and fled gracefully toward it. Asmundr chalked the schoolhouse board, while hail drummed the roof. When chaos enters, give it a job. Below it, we do not save objects. We save meanings. He pointed with his quill. Read it. Pick one. Perform. What's a meaning? A girl asked, clutching crack bowl. Whatever your hand knows, even when your eyes don't, he said. The girl put the bowl down, took a towel from the stack Gudrun had thrown on a bench in Part 5 and never reclaimed, and began drying the slush as if mopping were prayer. It was. Hagalaz escalated, as editors do when you thank them too soon. The stones grew larger, the intervals shorter. Lightning stitched the clouds together with impatient thread. The wind unzipped itself. A sheet of hail drove across the harbor and came back, unexpectedly, from the wrong direction. That's unfair, Bjorn shouted, delighted despite the cut on his cheek. Storms aren't fair, Sigrid said. They're thorough. A roof went, one of the old ones, maintained with stubbornness instead of carpentry. The family underneath had already moved to the schoolhouse. Skjoldhar was learning to evacuate conclusions before they collapsed. The roof landed in the square and split exactly where the joist had lied about being sound. Hrock nodded like a teacher pleased with a dramatic demonstration. The iron bells sang harder. Children began catching the rhythm. The hail struck on the downbeat, skittered on the upbeat. A drummer boy with a pot and a wooden spoon invented syncopation by necessity and grinned like death forgiven. Ylva set up a threshold table at the schoolhouse door. Anyone coming in left one thing they didn't need anymore: a worry, a saucepan, an opinion about perfection. They took one thing they did need: a blanket, a cup, a silence. She stamped wrists with charcoal. In/out. Practice leaving and taking, she said evenly. While it's easy. A crack opened where no crack had been. Not in a wall. In a story. The village's favorite tale, about the founder who single-handedly slew a sea serpent with a ladle, split down the middle. The part about the ladle slid away. The part about neighbors hauling the founder out of the surf when net remained. The story felt lighter, more true. Asmundr almost wept from the relief of it. Hagalaz edits myth, he whispered, reverent as any supplicant. We should have invited it earlier. Invite, Gudrun said, parrying a hailstone with a skillet. You do the inviting. I'll do the catching. All storms of eyes. Hagalaz had a pupil like polished bone. At its center, the whiteness thinned, as if the skies suddenly remembered that vision requires space. In the gap, on the ridge above Skjoldhar, a figure watched, long-limbed, angular, wearing a cloak of shattered ice that never fell. It did not smile. It did not frown. It measured. Sigrid climbed toward it alone. Foolish, Bjorn called, but he did not follow. He had learned the difference between rescue and interference. The hail softened the closer she drew, as if politeness were the storm's native etiquette. Sigrid didn't bow. Runes don't ask for worship. They ask for competence. "You're here to break us," she said, when she was close enough to see the figure's face, which looked like a decision made by weather. It tilted its head. Its mouth moved without breath, pushing it. "I'm here to show you which parts fall apart when you stop holding them together out of habit. That's a nasty hobby," she said. "It's a necessary one." The voice sounded like hail striking, but the kind that doesn't bruise, only wakes. "Then show me," she said, "but not all at once. You have learned to bargain since Gibo." "Good." The figure pointed down at the village. 3 strikes. You choose where they land." Sigrid swallowed. "Choice is a crown that pinches. If I pick wrong, you will learn faster." She looked at Skjoldhar. At the roofs, the bells, the schoolhouse, the luck pot under its awning. The river newly respectful, Bjorn's hair inventing its own wind rose. "First," she said, "the granary, the old section. Strike it. You would risk hunger? I would risk mold pretending to be charity." The hailstone did not fall. It arrived, a white fist through old wood. The outer wall buckled. The inner wall held. The rotten sacks burst, releasing a smell everyone had been politely ignoring. Villagers gagged and then, faces hard with practicality, dragged the ruined grain out. Behind the rot, they found a cache of good seed hidden for Prophet 5 winters back. The owner cried without excuse. The village moved without accusation. Hrock thawed the ground to receive the bad grain as compost. Gudrun sent the seed to the need table. The bells applauded in minor keys. "Second," Sigrid said, "the shrine to the founder's ladle." Asmundr winced, proud and wounded. The hail smashed a little altar in the square with an almost affectionate thud. Under the broken stone lay another stone, engraved long ago and then conveniently tiled over. "We saved each other." The town laughed, a sound with edges, like glass turning back into sand. "Third," Sigrid said, throat tight, "my mother's bench." The storm paused. Cruel. Necessary. Sigrid looked at the bench under the wind-curled spruce, the place where she had learned to press her ear to wood and hear the world. Someone had smoothed the seat, so often the grain shone. No one sat there now. What sits still and sacred too long calcifies. The hailstone that fell was small, precise. It nicked the bench's edge. The bench did not splinter. It asked to be used and not hushed. 2 children, seeing the newly imperfect seat, sat. One listened, awkwardly. The other told him what the spruce had said. It wasn't Sigrid's voice. It was theirs. Sigrid's lungs hurt. Then they worked. "You picked well," Hagalaz said, "which is as warm as hail gets." "Why 3?" Sigrid asked, because she had learned to interview runes when they were chatty. Because the world loves patterns. Break 3, and it remembers that patterns are choices, not prisons. "Will you stop now?" "No." The hail brightened. "But I will aim where denial is thickest. You have my preference. You do not have my mercy. Mercy is our job," she said. "Good," said Hagalaz, and smiled without moving its mouth. The storm turned, as storms do, from crescendo to purpose. Having cracked what was ripe for cracking, it began to tidy. Hail became smaller, steadier, surgical. Broken crates turned edge up to be handles. Shutter hinges lifted themselves. The river, swollen with sudden melt, found the channels Rock had suggested and obeyed them with the pleased dignity of water that gets to be river-shaped again. In the schoolhouse, the class changed subjects. Sigrid wrote on the board with cold, stiff fingers. "Hagalaz is a period. Use it. Beneath, what will we end today?" People answered out loud. "The story where I am always last to eat and proud of it. The rule that says we only mend our own roofs. The way I keep my grief like a trophy. Charging extra during storms." The fishmonger wrote that one, cheeks red, pretending I didn't want to be chosen. Sigrid didn't look to see who said it. She didn't need to. They then wrote a second column. What begins if we end this? The answers were less eloquent and more useful. Soup, sleep, Invitations. A bell tone we can stand. Asmund drew a thick dot between the columns. A period, he said. It's a small stone you put at the end of a path, so you'll stop walking in circles. Ilva leaned in the doorway, rain and ice braiding on her pauldron. Heroes hate periods. Heroes, Gudrun said, need editors. Everyone does, Bjorn added, and did not look at Sigrid, and so she looked at him. By dawn the next day, the clouds had wrung themselves out, a blue, so clean it made your gums ache open above Skjoldhar. The ground glittered with hail that had decided to be pearls. The village smelled like lemons nobody owned, bright, cut, new. The damage was real. So were the improvements. 12 roofs gone, 12 rebuilt better by nightfall, 2 fishing boats destroyed, 3 more repaired the way they should be a year ago. The old shrine to the ladle gone. The inscription, "Do we save each other," mounted above the luck pot with you pegs and no fanfare. The rotten grain turned soil in the spring field. The good seed counted out loud and planted in shame and joy. Hagalaz left one gift on the ridge where Sigrid had bargained, a single hailstone that didn't melt. Inside it, a tiny crack formed the shape of the rune, a rune within a rune, like a lesson folded for later. When she warmed it in her hands, words formed along its slick. End usefully. Nothing about ending kindly? Bjorn asked, curious, cautious. Kindness is our job, Sigrid said, remembering what she had told the storm. Hagalaz does the brave cut. We keep the wound clean. Asmund cleared his throat. The ledger notes you're collecting runes like a very tasteful hoarder. I'm collecting verbs, Sigrid said. The world keeps using them. Good, he replied, because the next one will try to stop them all. He didn't have to say it. The breath on the back of their necks said it for him. The cold, that wasn't wind. The stillness with intent. The way puddles stiffened into mirrors that refused to give faces back without a price. Isa, Ilva said softly. Hrock went quiet in a way that made the air lean on him. Isa's not the villain, he murmured, but it does love proof more than people. Gudrun wrapped the unmelted hailstone in cloth and tucked it into Sigrid's bag. Bring your commas, she said to Asmund. We may need to break winter into breathable clauses. Bjorn shouldered a coil of line. And bring the luck pot, he added to no one and everyone. If we're going to freeze, we might as well share the timing. The village ate hot food with chipped spoons and no apologies. Children built small fortresses out of hailstones and then knocked doors into them, because the school had taught them thresholds are part of any decent fortification. The bells rested, iron soft from singing. Sigrid stood at the edge of the square and listened to a silence that, for once, wasn't absence. It was readiness. Hagalaz had cut, and the world had not bled out. It had made room on the ridge. The storm's figure was gone, but in its place the ice had braided itself into a low arch. On the keystone, a line of frost in the hand she was beginning to recognize. Do not worship the hammer. Worship the way it stops you from lying. She smiled. We won't worship either, she said into the blue. We'll use them. The blue kept being blue, which is all the confirmation the honest ever need. And somewhere, beyond Helgado's cold bookkeeping, Isa opened its clear eyes. It considered the village that shared, the luck that circulated, the truth that breathed, the endurance that bent, the gifts that unhooked, the motion that remembered, and it thought. Be still. Prove it. It began with breath, deciding to hold itself. Not fear, proof. The kind of pause a mason makes to feel if the wall is true, the quiet a bow takes before the string releases the arrow. Overnight, puddles became mirrors with opinions. The river smoothed itself into a ribbon of glass and refused to gossip with stones. Frost wrote lines across windows, so straight even Asmund saluted them. Isa, Sigrid said, stepping outside into a morning that would not be hurried. Ice, the stillness that tests the sentence. Bjorn exhaled slowly, watching the vapor not drift but stand. It's polite, he said warily, as a politeness might break his oars. Gudrun touched the porch rail. Her fingertips squeaked one patient syllable. I hate polite weather, she said, which in Gudrun's mouth is a compliment. Asmund arrived with a stack of slates and the solemnity of a librarian about to rearrange planets. We have entered the proving, friends. ISA is not punishment. It is verification. If it cracks, it needed to. Does it need to crack people? Ilva asked. Pauldron rhymed in silver. Only those pretending to be statues, he replied. Hrock said nothing, which for a thawed giant was both on brand and respectful. He bowed his head to the river, and the river bowed back, a fraction, an exchange of professional courtesies between opposites who sometimes date. Sigrid walked to the water's edge. Her breath pushed a circle of fog over the ice. It did not spread. It held. The surface showed her face not as she preferred it, but as it was. Tired, stern, in love with the work of gentling the world. "Be kind," she whispered to the ice. "Be exact," the ice replied, with a silence that sentences use when they have already told the truth once. Skjoldhar learned quickly, because storms had already taught them the haste of chaos. ISA taught the discipline of not rushing to repair. The school opened as a house of pauses. On the chalkboard, Asmund wrote, "Isa, a breath held until meaning arrives." Below it, "Test/do not touch/touch and listen/break on purpose." "Isn't that last column illegal?" a boy asked. "Illegal is sometimes a synonym for necessary when done carefully." Asmund said, "We are not out to preserve ice. We are out to preserve truth." They began with the bridges. Gudrun and 2 apprentices walked the spans with mallets and patience, tapping until each note told the story of its beam. Hollow? Replace. True? Bless. Stubborn? Teach. The river below watched with narrow eyes that warmed no one and judged everyone equally. When Gudrun lifted her mallet to strike a suspect plank, she paused and looked at Sigrid. "Break it?" the smith asked. Sigrid pressed her ear to the wood. The grain whispered the past year's weather, 2 arguments, and 1 apology no one had heard. "Break it," she said. "Leave the apology. It holds." The mallet fell. The plank split. The apology stayed, a stain shaped like mercy. At the harbor, Bjorn traced his thumb along a boat's keel. The ice caught at the undersides of hulls, not in cruelty, but in curiosity. Boats that had been mended with pride held beautiful. Boats mended with insistence that hid rot. Those the ice shoved back on the shore with an almost parental sigh, as if to say, "Start again, properly this time." Bjorn took a draw-knife to his own skiff, scraping down honest wood. "ISA's a better foreman than me," he grunted. "You're learning," Sigrid said. "I'm tired of learning." He smiled without teeth, "which means I'm doing it right." The luck pot did not freeze. People touched it as they passed, because it hummed like a heart wrapped in bark. ISA seemed to respect the bowl's function, a stillness dedicated to movement's fairness. The U glowed under rhyme. Beside it, the inscription salvaged from the destroyed shrine, "We save each other," wore a crisp edge of frost as if truth preferred serif. Nalth's sparks had not faded either. The faint warmth in every palm had become a habit. Villagers carried coals from house to house in lidded pans, literal warmth redistributed. They carried pauses, too. At the threshold table, Ilva had added a new rule: if you can wait, wait. People practiced letting others pass first. The waiting itself felt like being seen. "I don't like waiting," a fisherman confessed. "Then it's good for you," Ilva said, and stamped iron on his wrist when he offered to carry 3 lidded pans to the far row. On the ridge, a new arch of clear ice had formed overnight, an ear, perfectly shaped, facing the village. Sigrid laughed when she saw it. "ISA wants us to listen louder." "Can one listen louder?" Asmund asked, delighted by the oxymoron, and more delighted that it wasn't one. "Yes," she said, by wanting less to answer. Toward noon, a long, thin crack ran the length of the river like a thought. Everyone heard it, because ISA speaks in a register that human marrow recognizes. "Back!" Bjorn barked, and no one argued. No one would again, not with that tone. The crack paused at the bend, considered, then split an offshoot through the ice toward the old mill race, a channel long in use since the wheel had been taken down for repairs, and then promoted to furniture. The crack stopped at the race's head like a dog at a door. "It wants water to remember work." Hrock said softly. Sigrid set down her bag, pulled out the unmelted hailstone Hagalaz had left, and pressed it to the old sluice gate. And usefully, she whispered. The hinge, embarrassed by idleness, complied. The gate lowered. The first thin trickle slid through, then more, then whumph. A body of water went from mirror to muscle. The wheel set back hastily, barked once, coughed twice, and turned. The mill house sighed, as if unhobbling an old knee. Something loosened in the village's chest. Proof, Asmund murmured. ISA want institutions to either die clean or live well. No middle. Then let's live well, Gudrun said, brisk with gratitude. We have grain to grind for spring and a rumor of seed. Afternoon brought ISA's harder tests. Reflection. Ice loves mirrors. Mirrors love lies when they're flattering and knives when they aren't. ISA offered neither. It offered correction. People who leaned over ponds saw themselves as they were today, not as they had once been or hoped to be tomorrow. It was rude. It was holy. A woman who refused to forgive saw her jaw anchored to a shadow heavier than pride. She cried, wiped her face, and went to borrow a word from Ylva. Threshold. A boy who thought himself a coward saw a scar on his cheek shaped like a map and asked Bjorn to teach him knots. Bjorn tied one and then put the rope in the boy's hands. You do the second, he said. The boy did poorly. The ice approved anyway. Sigrid knelt by the mill pond and forced herself to meet her own gaze. She prepared to see severity and instead saw tender alarm. She'd been walking too hard, listening too fast, solving too much. Iwaz burned quietly in her palm, a reminder to bend. Ansas hummed at her throat. Speak before you are asked, but the word it suggested was rest. Later, she told her face. Her face looked unimpressed. Now, said a voice she trusted too much to ignore. It wasn't Bjorn's. It was ice. Sigrid stood, dizzy with being agreed with by a mineral. Fine, she said aloud to no one and everyone. I will nap. 10 minutes. Do not break anything interesting. She lay on a bench in the schoolhouse where sunlight and cold made a truce. She fell asleep instantly. That is what competence does when finally permitted. She dreamed of the first time her mother had put a listening stone in her palm. Hear the world, her mother had said, but let it finish. In the dream, the world finished and waited to be thanked. She woke with tears in her hair and a new stillness under her ribs. ISA had completed a sentence she didn't know she'd left dangling. Toward dusk came the part of every rune's visit Sigrid had learned to expect. The negotiation. The arch on the ridge thickened into a doorway. Through it stepped a figure that looked less like a person and more like a reconsideration given shape, long-limbed, clear as an icicle, faceted with centuries. Its face was not cold. It was unalarmed. When it moved, it made the sound of blade sheathed thoughtfully. Sigrid climbed to meet it, not alone this time. Bjorn came because sailors have pacts with horizons. Gudrun because hammers have pacts with choices. Asmund because punctuation is packed with pauses. Ylva because thresholds are a jurisdiction. Hrock because thaw and freeze are cousins who pretend otherwise until they're needed. The figure inclined its head, a courtesy from one structural element to another. You did not worship the storm, it said without a mouth. Good. Do not worship me. We won't, Sigrid said, but we'd like to contract with you. Bjorn coughed into his fist to hide a grin. We're bargaining with ice now. We bargain with anything that thinks it's necessary, Sigrid said. ISA's gaze moved. No eyes, only refractions. Terms. Asmund to produce a slate. Because of course he did. We request the following, that ice be allowed to prove, not punish. That reflection be granted to those who seek it without shaming those who aren't ready. That the freeze serve the living by storing what will feed spring. That bridges refuse liars and hold fools only until they learn. Price, ISA said. Sigrid lifted her chin. We will not call stillness peace unless it heals. We will not call silence virtue unless it listens. We will keep moving what is meant to move even when we want to rest. Insufficient. Gudrun stepped forward. We'll also break what we're pretending is sacred. When the break will save us. The ice warmed a degree, which in ISA is equivalent of a handshake. Two more, came Ylva's voice, Gentle as rules at rescue. We will make thresholds for apologies in winter, doors that open inward, so the snow cannot trap a sorry outside. And we will teach the children to fall without fear, so the first break doesn't break them. ISA's facets brightened. One more. Hrock lifted his hand. When spring comes, we will grieve you properly. We will not pretend we won without you. The ice sang then, a sound so thin it was almost light. It was agreement. Addendum. ISA said, and everyone winced affectionately at Asmund, who muttered, always an addendum. When the freeze save you from yourselves, tell the river who did it. Rivers are vain. We'll gossip in your favor, Bjorn promised. Sigrid held out both hands. The figure touched her palms. The contact was not cold. It was exact. The rune burned, faint and clean, along her lifelines. 2 parallel strokes that met the others already living in her. Rado at her wrist movement, Yibo at her pulse exchange, Iwaz in her palm endurance, and Suz at her throat speech. Perthro her breath luck, Nauthus's embers under skin need, Hagalaz in her bag as a lesson that didn't melt. ISA settled in with the quiet of a truth that intends to stay. Prove it, the figure said, and stepped back through the arch, which sealed itself into a curve of immaculate blue. On its keystone, Frost wrote another line in that now familiar hand. Rest is a verb. Conjugate together. They did. That night's Jodhar practiced stillness, without neglect. The schoolhouse became a dormitory of naps. 10 minutes on the hour, enforced by Asmunder's bell and Gudrun's glare. The luck pot accepted a new kind of offering, minutes, and redistributed them to the overtired. Ilva invented a game for the children. Fall Like a Future, where you learn to drop and roll without clenching shame. Bjorn tied lines across the harbor not to moor boats, but to guide feet to safe paths. The wind admired the innovation and behaved. Sigrid took first watch in the middle of the night and found there was nothing to watch for, only to watch with. She sat on the threshold of the schoolhouse, eyes on the river's polished back. Stars rested there like punctuation marks too far from any clause, content to be shine without assignments. Her mother would have liked this, she thought, with the kind of sorrow that no longer had teeth. The bench under the spruce was occupied, properly, by teenagers saying nothing important and memorizing each other's breathing. The mill wheel turned at the pace of him and chores. Far uphill, a fox rode its quiet in the snow, and the snow remembered it. She almost didn't hear the first cry. Not human. Ice. A hairline crack feathered out from a mill-race mouth, delicate as a frost fern. ISA was making a request. What do you need? Sigrid asked the crack. Release, said the air. She went to wake Hrock and Bjorn, but they were already beside her. Some skills are communal by design. Together, they lifted the sluice just enough to change the pitch, not the song. The crack sighed, satisfied, and faded. Proof. Bjorn murmured again, beginning to like the taste of the word. Sigrid smiled. Practice. Morning arrived diffidently, as if reluctant to interrupt so much agreement. The sky wore a blue that knew the recipe for white, and kept it on purpose. ISA remained, not as a rest, but as architecture. The village moved within the way a hand moves in a well-made glove, supported, not stalled. Asmund rang the bell once. The tone, dented by Hagalaz, clarified by ISA, spilled across roofs and into kitchens and came back as soup lists and laughter with steam in it. He chalked the day's lesson where anyone passing could read. We will not hurry what must heal in ITS own time. Gudrun hammered hinges slowly, because slowness now felt like skill, not fate. Ilva made tea and taught 3 apologies to people who'd been trying to invent new ones, because the old ones hadn't been given room. Hrock sat on a stump and did nothing so well that the stump felt seen. Bjorn cut lines into the ice, lanes he called them, for children to skate without colliding, and then he fell on purpose to demonstrate, and laughed so hard he bruised the air into forgiving him. Sigrid walked the river from bend to bend, ear to the world, hands empty for once. The runes hummed politely inside her, like a well-tuned library. She touched the arch and the ear and the bench in each place where the village had made a pact with pausing. She whispered thank yous into wood, and never explained to anyone why certain doors opened easier afterward. By dusk the mirrors and puddles began to blur. not because ISA was leaving, but because the village had looked enough for one day. "Will it go?" Bjorn asked, standing beside her on the ridge where the arch had first formed. "No," Sigurd said. "It will keep proving us. But it won't arrest us anymore. We pass for now." He nodded, then cleared his throat in the careful way of men who have finally understood that words are tools and not fireworks. "I can be still with you," he said. She did not clap or cry. She set her hand in the crook of his elbow and stood, and the posture was a sentence that did not need a period yet. Down below, the luck pot glowed as if warmed by breath no one could see. The Mills Slow him did not apologize for being mechanical. The bell's voice wore its dent-like wisdom. A fox slept under the spruce in a curl of punctuation. High above, Helgado noted, ISA, contract filed. Skjoldhar, provisional mastery of pause. In the dark beyond the ledger's edges, another rune stirred. Jera, year and harvest, cycle and return. It licked a finger, tested the village's weather, and smiled like continuity, breaking bread with change. But that was tomorrow's lesson. Tonight, the cold held him gently and let the world rest inside its palm without freezing. And ISA, satisfied, wrote one last sentence in frost on the schoolhouse door, in a hand they now claimed as partly theirs. "You may stop here. Not forever. Enough." It began as all renewals do, with something unimportant deciding it wanted to live. A seed, dropped by accident in a crack between the cobblestones near the luck pot. Dared the frost notice it. It didn't sprout, not yet, but it pulsed faintly, as if rehearsing. The air around it shifted from still to expectant. ISA had finished proving. Jera had begun remembering. Sigurd noticed first. She was sweeping the schoolhouse steps, her broom making little rhythms that sounded almost like patience. "It's breathing," she murmured. Bjorn squinted. "The seed, the world," she said. He shrugged but smiled. About time. Skjoldhar had changed its pace without realizing. People no longer raced on. They met it halfway. The river still wore its skin of glass, but light seeped under it, a golden fever that tasted like thaw. Asmundr, writing at the long table in the square, read aloud from his newest definition. Jera, the harvest of all patterns, the reward for time endured, not payment. Completion. Gudrun grunted approval. Completion makes a decent anvil. Ylva poured tea that steamed like prophecy. Completion scares people, she said. It smells like ending. Completion, Sigurd corrected gently, smells like beginning again without shame. Hrock, watching the river, added, "The ice is cracking on purpose now." That's Jera's humor. The first crack came like applause. Children pointed. The surface of the river split in a neat curve, water rising beneath, not chaotic, measured. Each break melted into a shape. Circles, spirals, glyphs no scholar had yet written, but every bone in Skjoldhar recognized. The ice didn't collapse. It rearranged. Bjorn dipped a hand into the nearest ring. "It's warm." "Cycles of temperature," Asmundr said, delighted. "We're entering the semester thaw." The luck pot pulsed once, twice, then burst into light. The yew bowl didn't shatter. It shed. From its heart grew a sapling, thin and defiant, its bark patterned with every rune they had met. Rado ran along its trunk. Gibo crossed its branches. Iwaz marked its spine, and Isa traced its edges in patient silver. "Jera," Sigurd whispered, "the years circle." The tree grew faster than growth should be polite. Within minutes, it was taller than a man. Birds arrived before leaves. They perched on bare twigs and sang, as if repaying a debt. Their breath melted the last rime on the rooftops. The villagers gathered, uncertain whether to bow or build a fence. Ylva put her hands on her hips. "Let's try neither." "Then what?" Bjorn asked. "Let it stand," she said. "We've earned a landmark we didn't make." That evening, they held no ceremony, only supper. Bread, fish, steam, laughter. The warmth came from below, as though the earth remembered fire. Hrock sat close enough to the hearth to hum. When he hummed, the stones did too. Sigurd ate slowly. "It feels circular," she said. Asminder nodded. As Jera intended. The rune doesn't deliver reward. It delivers recognition. We were standing at the edge of proof, looking back, seeing we were never still. Bjorn chewed his bread like a man suspicious of wisdom. So what? The year thanks us. The year invites us, Sigrid said. It's offering the next round. In the middle of the night, the air changed again, not colder, not warmer, but newer. The sky rolled itself inside out, scattering constellations like spilled seeds. The aurora bent low, whispering colors only children understood. Sigrid rose from her bed and stepped outside. The seed by the cobblestones had sprouted. 2 small leaves glowed, trembling, impossibly green. A shape waited by the sapling in the square. A woman woven from light and soil, her hair the color of dawn seen through fog. She was beautiful in the way that gravity is, not gentle, but convincing. I am Jera, she said. Her voice sounded like the hinge between seasons. Sigrid bowed without ceremony. We've been expecting you. I know. Jera's eyes gleamed with a slow amusement. You've been rehearsing gratitude. Bjorn, half-dressed, stumbled out of the schoolhouse, rubbing his eyes. Another one? Do we ever get a holiday for metaphors? Not while you breathe, Jera said mildly. He groaned. Figures. She smiled at him, a patient curve that might have been forgiveness. You've done well, she said to them all. But cycles are not earned. They are joined. What you built, this habit of mercy, this architecture of pauses, must now feed itself. Gudrun frowned. Feed itself how? By breaking rhythm on purpose. Jera said, the wheel turns only because part of it always forgets it's a circle. Asminder, already writing on his sleeve, muttered, fascinating paradox. Self-renewal via strategic amnesia. Don't overthink it, she said. Just plant. They did. At dawn, everyone in Skjoldhar found something to bury. The widow buried her empty cup. The fisherman buried the knot that had never held. Gudrun buried a bent nail. Ylva buried a feather that had once belonged to the wind she'd argued with. Bjorn buried a laugh he'd never dared use. Sigrid buried her listening stone. She pressed it into the thawing soil beside the new tree. For later, she whispered. Jera stood watching, her form blurring as sunlight touched her. You have learned what none of the gods could remember, she said, that the end of effort is not rest, it's readiness. Then she reached out, touched the bark of the newborn tree, and vanished, leaving a ring of green light that sank into the roots. The year turned. You could hear it, a low hum that ran under everything, under bells, under soup simmering, under gossip and work in silence. A pulse not loud but committed. Children learned to skate on the ice that remained, their lines carving spirals that made sense only from the sky. The fox under the spruce had kits. The mill wheel turned steadily, catching the light like it was born to. Asminder wrote his final line for the season on the schoolhouse door. We are not waiting for spring. We are practicing it. Bjorn hung a net to dry and did not hurry it. Ylva forged new hinges that opened both ways. Gudrun rebuilt the roof that Hagalaz had broken and whistled off key. Hrock melted a path through the last snow, so the sapling shadow could find the river. Sigrid stood at the center of it all, hand on the young tree, eyes closed. The runes inside her pulse in harmony. Rado's movement, Gibo's fairness, Iwa's endurance, Ansa's truth, Perthro's chance, Notha's need, Hagalaz's honesty, Isa's calm, and now Jera's turning. Together they made a song she almost recognized. When she opened her eyes, Bjorn was beside her. Feels like we finished something, he said. We did, she replied, and it's beginning again. He glanced at the tree. You think the next cycle will remember us? Sigrid smiled. No, it'll make something better. Forgetting is the price of growth. He nodded, thoughtful. Then we should leave good soil. They stood in silence, listening to the first real wind in months, soft, aimless, alive. It carried no warnings, no voices, no prophecy, just the smell of earth deciding to forgive itself. Somewhere above the ridge, the gods exhaled, relieved that mortals were finally tending what divinity had abandoned, the art of continuation. And Skjoldhar, small and luminous under the new light, turned quietly with the world. It began with the road waking up, not the cobbles, not the ruts. The idea of a road, the thin, stubborn thread between places that refuses to admit distance is real. Overnight, the frost lines softened into pathways. The snow unknit itself along familiar routes. The wind stopped drifting and chose a direction. Somewhere a cart creaked as if answering its name. It was, Sigrid said, stepping onto the lane beyond the schoolhouse. Partnership. Motion that keeps its promises. Bjorn rolled his shoulders, as sailors do when the horizon whispers. Feels like travel. Feels like trust, Ylva corrected, examining a new hinge she'd forged to the Luckpot's awning, one that opened in both directions without complaint. Travel gives you scenery. Trust gives you a reason. Gudrun snorted amiably. Trust gives you someone to blame when the axle snaps. Asmund appeared with 2 satchels in the resigned glow of a man who understands that punctuation is merely road signage for sentences that prefer improvisation. If we are to honor Waz, we will need to leave. Hrock, who had grown fond of Skjoldhar's benches, said nothing, which was his dignified way of agreeing to walk. Sigrid looked at the sapling grown from the Luckpot, now taller, its young bark stitched with runes like a modest tapestry. Rado pulsed there. ISA shone, Jera hummed. The tree's shadow pointed along the river, as if offering a benediction shaped like a compass. "We'll be back," she told it. The sapling said nothing, which is how trees bless pilgrims who remember to promise less. They walked at the pace of companionship, faster than loneliness, slower than fear. The road felt aware beneath their boots, not sentient in a theatrical way. Simply alert, like a dog who has finally been asked to do what it loves. At the first rise, Sigrid felt the change. Stones showing faint hoofprints where none had been yesterday. A pattern repeating. A horse without a horse. Bjorn knelt, touched the prints, and smiled with a boy's unguarded mouth. "It remembers," he said. "The road does," Sigrid replied. "It keeps the weight of arrival safe." At noon the sky folded itself into a blue you could pour. They ate standing, because sitting can sometimes argue with momentum. When they shouldered packs again, the wind braided itself into 2 strands, one tugging toward the coast, the other toward the uplands where the pines think in columns. "Choice," Asmund observed, as if the weather had written a clause with 2 objects. "Split path," Bjorn said. "Split us," Ylva countered. Sigrid placed her palm on the lane. It was thrummed up through her bones. 2 strokes moving in parallel, not chained, not mirrored, together because they keep choosing to. "I know what it wants," she said. "Of course you do," Gudrun replied. "It wants proof." "Of partnership," Sigrid said, and it hurt to have to say out loud. "It wants us to travel apart and return still we." Bjorn's smile tightened. Convenient. The wind wanted the same. The road listened without inserting itself into the argument. It was as good manners. It never argues a partnership into being. 3 days, Sigrid said. We each take a path that needs us. We meet again where the road becomes a river. She nodded north. At the Horse Stone, if it still stands. It stands, Hrock said softly. The land kept it. 3 days, Bjorn agreed and didn't add a flourish. Iwaz hates flourishes. They divide it as craft divides labor, by usefulness, not narrative symmetry. Bjorn took the coastal path to speak wind back into the curiosity of fishing boats along villages with more superstition than rope. Gudrun and Asmund went upland, hinges and words to mend bargains with sawmills that had learned to rasp without listening. Hrock angled toward the thaw's stubborn border, where spring needed a negotiator who could make ice feel heroic about yielding. Ylva, at Sigrid's side, shook out her shoulders and said, I escort partners, living, dying, and in between. I like to see how loyalty treats rest stops. Sigrid laughed, and the laugh had that thin edge of fear that keeps a blade honest. Let's find it. The first test came at a bend where the road ran out of proof and memory took over. The lane narrowed into a path, then into a suggestion, then into grass. Ahead, a marsh lay quiet as a secret, reeds writing cursive in slow wind. A fallen tree stretched from one bank to the other, a bridge offered by accident, Ilva tapped the trunk with her spear butt, slick with yesterday. Trust, Sigrid said dryly, doesn't require stupidity. She crouched, ear to bark. The tree remembered Storm, weight, a fox, 2 children, and a cart that turned back rather than risk pride underwater. She whispered to it, and the bark warmed a fraction, which was how plants say, I can try a little. They crossed in silence, one foot after the other. Each step a question the trunk answered with a low, cooperative groan. In the middle, Sigrid paused and looked down. The water held the sky without swallowing it. She saw her face, and beside it, not Ilva's, Bjorn's, laughing somewhere else at something the wind had said wrong on purpose. The ache wasn't a wound. It was a tether tugging to be checked. It wants us to admit it, she said when they stepped onto the far bank. Admit what? Ilva asked, though her eyes knew. That partnership costs distance. And that distance is how trust measures itself without drama. Ilva's mouth tilted. Say that in the school, and people ask for diagrams. Fine, Sigrid said. We'll draw horses. They walked until the light lowered its expectations. At a crossroad where no signs remained, they found the second test waiting. A cart, half in a ditch, a wheel broken at the rim where someone had mended it with prayer instead of wood. A woman stood there with the posture of those who have not cried yet out of respect for their own stubbornness. You two from Skjoldhar? She asked, and didn't wait for the answer. Everyone suddenly has decent hinges and a better bell tone. Figured you were to blame. That tracks, Ilva said. Where to? Back, the woman said. Forward. Home. She ticked options off like complaints. My girl's sick. My grains are wet. My patience is a thread. She gestured toward the broken wheel. And this is my miracle. Sigrid knelt. The rim had splintered exactly where a craftsman had flattened a knot rather than work around it. She could almost hear the sentence he told himself when he'd done it. It'll hold. It was faintly. A wheel is a partnership with road, not a plea to fate. Give me your knife, Sigrid said to the woman. She cut away the prayer, which fought because prayers do. Under it, a knot waited, tight as a lie forgiven by habit. She didn't cut the knot. She moved the joint, shifted the strain to true grain, then lashed the rim with a strap from her own pack. The woman watched, hands unbusy for the first time that day. You need coin. We need you to get where you're going, Ilva said, lifting the cart out of the ditch like a door she decided to respect. The price is honesty later, when you're rested. To yourself first. The woman nodded, which is the only contract a Waz ever enforces. She climbed onto the seat and took up the reins. The road lifted under the cart, like a friend's shoulder. They walked beside her till the path found gravel. At the next rise, Sigrid stopped, looked back, and felt the road looking with her. Still trusting? Ilva asked. More, Sigrid said, surprising herself. Night found them at a way station that insisted it was merely a farmhouse. A long, low building with a porch that learned patience. A yard in which wagons exhaled. A stable that hummed in its sleep. The sign over the door read to meet again, painted in a hand that preferred verbs. Inside, warmth made manners easy. The keeper nodded once, as if they confirmed a hypothesis about feet. Beds are clean. Soup is honest. Pay with coin or with a story that doesn't flatter you. Sigrid paid with both. 2 small coins in the tale of the time she had listened when she should have spoken, and the ensuing complications. Ilva contributed a short history of the battles she hadn't picked and how many lives that counted as. They ate. They slept. The road slept too, the way a song sleeps between verses while still being song. Just before dawn, a sound woke Sigrid. Hooves. Not on stone. In her chest. She went outside. It stood in the yard where moonlight was thinking about regret. A horse the color of road at dusk. Not flesh, remembering. You could see through its flank, into distances it had crossed. Its mane fell like written lines in wind, and every strand spelled a name she had not said often enough. It was, she said to it. It shook its head. Not a god, a keeper. The mind of the road, lone shape. It stepped close until her palm rested against a shoulder that felt like muscle and promise. A warmth climbed her arm. 2 strokes. Parallel, the rune writing itself on her bones where Rado had once announced itself as motion. Iwaz didn't care about motion. It cared about with 3 crossings, the horse thought said. Name them, Sigurd whispered, because bargains like lists. Across absence, across anger, across time. I can manage the first. You think you can. The horse's breath smelled like places. Absence is a river that rises before it asks permission. Take a boat built from daily news of yourself. And anger, carry it like a saddle. Good leather, oiled, never the rider. When it gets wet, dry it. When it cracks, mend it. When it bites, hang it up and walk. And time, she asked though she knew, arrive again even after you've changed. Do not demand to be recognized. Introduce yourself. I hate that, Sigurd said. Good, said Iwaz, and its ears twitched the way roads shift in spring. Will you run with us? I already do. It turned its head toward the east. Meet him. He is nearly done arguing with the shoreline. Sigurd laughed, bruised by happiness. Thank you. The horse put its forehead against hers, a partnership of foreheads, ridiculous and holy, and was gone without going. When she turned, Ilva leaned against the doorframe, pretending she had just arrived. Valkyries are polite like that. Ready? Ilva asked. Ready to be ready, Sigurd said. They reached the horse stone on the afternoon of the 3rd day, a standing slab on a knoll where travelers had tied vows so long the rock had learned to speak in braided whispers. Hoof prints ringed it in layers, some fresh, some older than the village. The stone had 2 grooves worn into its sides where hands had gripped it during promises that resisted adjectives. Bjorn stood there already, hair a weather vane for news. He did not run to her. He didn't need to. He lifted a hand. She lifted hers. Between them, across the last 5 steps, the road hummed with a satisfaction it didn't bother hiding. You okay? He asked. I crossed absence, she said, because partnership prefers nouns. Good. He gestured toward the path he'd taken. I crossed a town that tried to sell me their map as destiny. I bought a drink and left them a knot that changes shape when arrogance pulls it too tight. Useful, Sigurd said. He glanced at her face and then away in the careful way of men who have finally learned not to inventory women. Anger next, he asked. Later, she said. If we can't cross time first, anger will only be punctual. They clasped the horse stone with both sets of hands. Iwaz moved through the granite, like a homecoming. Asmundr and Gudrun appeared cresting the ridge, hauling the story of a sawmill that had learned to listen to trees without stopping to adore itself. Hrock came up from the hollow, content as melt water, leaving behind a negotiated peace between thaw and a pond that liked being mirrored too often. Ilva wrote nothing down, which is how you know everything significant happened, and didn't need proof beyond the faces that carried it. Report, Asmundr said, but the question sounded like a toast. We met ourselves, Sigurd answered, and practiced not arguing with change. Gudrun frowned happily. Did it work? For today, Bjorn said. We get to promise again tomorrow. They tied nothing to the horse stone. Iwaz dislikes trophies. Instead, they each spoke a small, exact sentence into its grooves. I will tell you when I plan to leave. Bjorn, I will admit when I want to be followed. Sigurd, I will arrive with hinges, not judgments. Gudrun, I will escort returns as fiercely as departures. Ilva, I will be heavy when asked and light when needed. Hrock, I will put commas in our journeys. Asmundr, the stone warmed. Somewhere a horse-shaped thought grazed on the grass of agreement. They walked home together. Not because the road insisted, but because choosing to do so in the face of roads that divide is the only worship Iwaz recognizes. The first lights of Skjoldhar showed at dusk, lamps glowing like vowels, the young tree taller, the bell tone deeper. Children ran out to meet them, and then stopped at the boundary of the choice the road had taught, honoring the last few steps as a ceremony. Sigrid didn't hurry them. She introduced herself to her own doorstep. Hello, she said to the schoolhouse threshold. Ridiculous. I've changed. The threshold, very wise, did not ask or prove it. It stepped aside. Inside, The maps on the wall had shifted overnight very slightly, as if the lines had chosen to be more honest about hills. On the table lay a single slip of mist that condensed into ink when she touched it. It was partnership registered. Terms, rechoose daily. Penalty for breach, repair together. Asminder sighed happily. A reasonable contract. Gudrun hung up a new tool, a yoke with 2 grips, light as promise, for hauling heavy things with better posture. Ilva stamped a threshold iron for all of them, because she could. Hrock sat on the floor like a mountain that had misplaced its summit. We crossed absence, he said to no one, smiling. Bjorn leaned against the doorpost and didn't look at Sigrid, which is a looking better than most looking. We should walk south when the thaw finishes. There's a river that thinks it's a king. Then we'll crown it with humility, Sigrid said. Laguz, Asminder murmured. Water, flow that refuses to be bullied. Soon, Sigrid said. Tonight we eat. They did. Soup steadied its own ladle. Bread forgave knives. When they were done, Sigrid stepped back outside. The road lay quiet, satisfied in the way work is after a good day. Ilwaz wrote one line in dust where moonlight could read it. Meet again. Every time, she said. The dust held the sentence long enough to be true, and then let it go, which was a lesson all along. The thaw began like a rumor, quiet, reckless, disbelieved. It crept down the mountains in slow veins of silver, slipping between roots and under doors, whispering, "You may move now." By the time Skjoldhar realized, the whole world was dripping, laughing, rinsing itself of patience. Laguz had arrived. No one saw her at first. You never do. Water doesn't arrive. It remembers. The rivers thickened with sound. The wells began to hum again. Even the sea, far beyond the valley, inhaled with a new tone, like an instrument rediscovering its first song. Sigrid woke to it before dawn, a tremor in her bones like the echo of someone calling her name underwater. She sat up, heart racing. She's awake. Bjorn turned in his bedroll by the hearth. Who? Another goddess? I thought we'd hit our quota. Laguz, Sigrid said. The rune of flow, of surrender that isn't defeat. He groaned. Fantastic. The one that makes everything damp. But even as he said it, the walls shimmered faintly. The air smelled like rain that had decided to forgive roofs. A droplet slid down the window pane, paused, and then, against all logic, flowed upward. Outside, the sea was coming inland again, not to flood, but to visit. By noon, Skjoldhar was alive with motion. Gutters gurgled hymns. Streams rethreaded themselves through the meadows like gossip. Hrock stood knee-deep in the river, laughing as the current tugged at his tunic. It remembers how to flirt. Asminder, notebook already ruined by spray, shouted over the rush. Laguz isn't play. It's flow toward purpose. Play is purpose. Hrock countered, sending a handful of water splashing toward him. Sigrid watched them, smiling. You sound like Ilwaz arguing with a mirror. Gudrun had set up her forge again, though her hammers refused to stay dry. This rune's going to rust every hinge I've got. Ilva walked past, barefoot, leaving ripples where there should have been footprints. Then maybe it's time for wooden doors. Laguz doesn't like locks. Sigrid knelt at the riverbank, dipping her hand into the current. The water slid around her fingers like silk, deciding which way to be fabric. Beneath its chill, she felt recognition, not worship, not warning, but conversation. Why return? She whispered. The answer came in thought, not sound, because stillness lied. She looked up. For the first time since the thaw, the clouds were listening. That night, Skjoldhar did not sleep. The town had become orchestra. Buckets overflowed in rhythm. Roofs dripped in staccato. Every puddle hummed a note that fit perfectly into a harmony no mortal had composed. Bjorn found Sigrid standing by the new tree, the one born from the luck pot. Its branches dripped light instead of rain, glowing faintly turquoise. Beneath it, the seed she had buried weeks ago had sprouted, curling toward her like a question mark made of green flame. You're talking to it again, Bjorn said. I'm listening to it. Same thing, if you do it long enough. She smiled faintly. The sea says it wants forgiveness. For what? For leaving. He leaned on his spear. It could start by apologizing to every sailor who drowned for dramatic effect. The sea doesn't do guilt, Sigrid said softly. It does memory. That's worse. Bjorn stared at the endless shimmer beyond the horizon. Then what do we do? We remind it that it's allowed to forget. At dawn, the tide came higher than it should have. The villagers stood on the ridge, watching as the ocean climbed their valley, not in fury but in curiosity. It stopped at the tree. The water did not flood. It folded upward, rising into a spiral that turned on itself until it resembled a woman made of wave and reflection. Her hair was foam and moonlight. Her skin was glass in motion. "I am Laguz," she said. Her voice was water remembering how to be word. "I have come to see if you learn the difference between flow and flight." Sigrid stepped forward. "We've learned not to damn the world. Have you learned not to drown in it?" Laguz asked. Bjorn muttered, "Trick question." Laguz smiled, an expression that looked like a tide turning. The gods used to fear surrender. They called it weakness, but only those who flow know what strength costs. Her gaze moved to Sigrid. "You carry my mark." Sigrid frowned. "I don't remember asking for it." "You didn't," Laguz said gently, "but you kept listening after the noise stopped. That's all water ever was. Listening made visible." She extended a hand. Water gathered there, forming a small sphere that glowed from within. Inside, something moved. Tiny shapes, flashes of silver. Fish? No. Memories. "Take it," Laguz said. Sigrid hesitated. "What happens if I do?" "You'll remember everything the world forgot." Bjorn whispered, "That sounds awful." Sigrid took it. The sphere dissolved into her palm. For a heartbeat, she saw it all. The first rains on stone, rivers carving laughter into valleys, ships swallowing prayers, tears shed by gods who couldn't name their sorrow. The moment a drop decided to fall just to see what gravity felt like. Then it was gone. Laguz watched her breathe. "Now you understand." "I understand we're fragile." "Fragility is how water wins," the goddess said. "Everything strong becomes vessel eventually." The tide receded slowly, as if reluctant to end the conversation. When it finally pulled back to the sea, it left behind trails of blue light that shimmered through the grass. Wherever they touched, new shoots appeared, tiny blades, tender but stubborn. Asmund crouched to examine one. "Laguz leaves footnotes," he murmured. Ilva brushed the dirt from her hands. "Then read them before they vanish." They didn't vanish. The glow sank into the soil instead, tracing veins beneath the village until all of Skjoldhar pulsed faintly with light, as though the sea had decided to dream inland for a while. That night, Sigrid couldn't sleep. Every sound called her name. The drip of rain, the whisper of wells, the sigh of the tide. She stepped outside. The sky was dark but full of movement, clouds twisting like runes learning to dance. At the river, Laguz's reflection waited. "You're not done," it said. Sigrid knelt. "What else must I learn?" Laguz smiled faintly from the water. "To flow through yourself." "I don't understand." "You will," said the reflection, "when the wind forgets where it came from." Then the river stilled, leaving only her own reflection. Calm, luminous, older somehow. Behind her, Bjorn approached quietly. "Talking to your reflection again?" he said softly. She started it. He smiled. "What did she say this time?" "That water wins." Bjorn looked toward the river. "You think she's right?" Sigrid watched the current move past them. Patient, relentless, tender. "If it isn't," she said, "it's still trying beautifully." They stood there until the first light came, painting everything silver. For the first time since the long winter began, Skjoldhar's reflection in the river did not look trapped. It looked alive. And from far out at sea, where the deep forgot its boundaries, a voice rolled softly across the waves, low, laughing, unafraid. "Flow well, little world." After the floods, the world forgot what quiet meant. Every sound was swollen with relief. Rivers gurgled like drunk poets. Trees dripped applause. Roofs clattered with leftover rain. The earth had been washed clean but not emptied. It was restless, fertile, humming like a womb that couldn't decide what to birth next. Then, one dawn too soft to have a direction, the hum fell silent. Not abruptly, respectfully, like someone lowering their voice before entering a sacred room. Sigrid woke to it. The air was thick with stillness, warm but cautious. She sat up and whispered, "Ingwas." Bjorn stirred beside the dying hearth. "Another rune? The one that comes after flow," she said. "Seed, gestation, the pause that isn't sleep." He groaned. "So, nature's holding its breath again?" "No," she said, smiling faintly. "It's remembering what patience feels like." Outside, Skjoldhar was unrecognizable. The rivers had withdrawn into quiet streams. The wind had folded itself into the soil. Even the sea, vast melodramatic sea, sat low and pensive, exhaling only when it had to. The village was wrapped in a peace so total that even thought had to walk barefoot. Hrock, standing by the forge, poked a stick into cold ashes. "I think the world died." Ylva shook her head. "No, it's dreaming." Asmundr scribbled the words pregnant silence into his notebook, then crossed them out. "Too obvious," he muttered. "Needs a footnote." Gudrun tested her hammer against the anvil. The sound rang once and hung there, suspended, as if the air itself was taking notes. "Ingwas doesn't like noise," she said. "Wants to see if we can build without motion." Sigrid smiled. "Then let's not build. Let's listen." They spent the next few days in a kind of reverent stillness. The usual rhythms of the village softened into quieter ones. Work continued, but slower, more deliberate. The blacksmith reheated metal not for production, but for warmth. The teacher wrote definitions that didn't require correction. The hunter trapped nothing but time. At night, they gathered around the luckpot tree, whose leaves now shone with a faint green-gold glow. Its roots pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat meditating. The tree was not growing, but thinking about it. Bjorn watched it, chewing on a blade of grass. "You ever think we've done enough?" "Enough what?" Sigrid asked. "Enough saving the world." She laughed softly. "Maybe the world's saving us this time." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds suspiciously like comfort." "Ingwas is comfort," she said. "The good kind. The kind that holds you while you're not ready to move." Bjorn looked at her a long time. "And when do we move again?" "When the seed cracks," she said. "When the rest becomes unbearable." On the 5th morning, the soil began to glow. At first, no one noticed. Skjoldhar had grown accustomed to miracles. But as the light deepened, spreading from the roots of the luckpot tree to the paths and under the houses, even the skeptics stopped pretending. The entire valley pulsed with warmth. The glow wasn't bright. It was intimate, like the inside of a heartbeat. Asmundr ran his hand through the grass. "It's breathing beneath us." "It's waiting," Sigrid said. "For what?" "For permission." The ground trembled. Not violently, but like laughter trying to stay polite. From beneath the tree, something began to rise. A shape, small at first, then widening as if molded by patience itself. It wasn't stone or wood. It was seed, a perfect oval size of cradle, etched with faint runes that shifted when you blinked. Inside it, something glimmered, not alive yet, but aware. Bjorn stepped closer. "That's not from us, is it?" "No," Sigrid whispered. "It's from everything else." The seed pulsed once, twice, then settled, sinking halfway into the earth. Around it, the ground softened, forming a basin filled with warmth instead of water. "It's asking us to wait," Sigrid said. Gudrun exhaled sharply. "Waiting is not my skill." Ylva folded her arms. "Maybe it's not asking. Maybe it's commanding." Bjorn crouched beside the seed. "And if it never opens?" Sigrid touched his shoulder. "Then we learn to love what doesn't answer." The waiting stretched into weeks. The villagers adjusted, without realizing. They worked in half-light and moved quietly, as if afraid to wake something sacred. No storms came. No new gods arrived. The world simply held. And in that holding, they changed. Bjorn stopped pacing. Ylva started humming again. Gudrun made toys instead of tools. Hrock carved spoons from driftwood and didn't bother sanding them smooth. Asmund wrote poems with endings that admitted uncertainty. Sigrid listened, to the ground, to the air, to her own heartbeat echoing against the world's. Then, one night, the sea began to sing. It wasn't music. It was vibration, deep and slow, like whales dreaming. The air thickened with tone. The leaves of the luckpot tree trembled in rhythm. Even the stars seemed to flicker in tempo. Sigrid rose from her bed and stepped outside. Bjorn joined her, rubbing his eyes. "Tell me I'm not hearing that." "You are," she said. "What does it mean?" "It means something wants to be born." The ground beneath the seed glowed brighter. Cracks appeared along its surface, faint lines of silver that pulsed like veins. The sound grew, not louder but truer. Everyone came, the entire village, standing in silence as the earth unwrapped its own mystery. The seed cracked open. Inside lay not a plant, not a child, but light. Thick and golden, shaped like warmth remembered. It rose slowly, swirling upward, forming no fixed body, only presence. The villagers shielded their eyes, but Sigrid stepped forward. "Ingwaz," she whispered. "You came." The light pulsed once. A voice filled the air, not outside them, but through them. "I never left. I am the pause between what you were and what you will be." Bjorn swallowed. "That's cryptic." "It's patient," Ingwaz replied. "Patience is clarity stretched thin enough to hold tomorrow." Sigrid bowed her head. "We've waited." "Then rest." Waiting was never about me. It was about you remembering how. The light began to sink again, folding back into the earth. The seed sealed itself, faintly glowing. The hum faded, leaving behind a silence so gentle it felt alive. When it was over, no one spoke for a long time. The wind dared not interrupt. Finally, Bjorn said softly, "So, we did nothing, and it worked." Sigrid smiled. "Exactly." He frowned. "That's unsettling." "It's growth," she said. "Invisible doesn't mean idle." The next morning, Skjoldhar looked the same, but the people did not. Their movements carried a new kind of grace, the peace of knowing when to stop. Asmund wrote a single sentence on the schoolhouse wall. "Ingwaz," the sacred act of not rushing what wants to arrive whole. Gudrun read it aloud and nodded. "For once," he's right. Ylva stretched, feeling the sun warm her shoulders. "What happens now?" Sigrid looked toward the sea. "Laguz flows. Ingwaz waits. The next will rise." Bjorn followed her gaze. "Which rune's next?" She smiled faintly. "Daggaz. The dawn." He winced. "Sunlight. Great. That'll ruin my dramatic mystique." Sigrid laughed, the sound carrying like the first morning bird. "Then you'll learn to glow." That night, the seed pulsed once more softly beneath the soil. A faint warmth spread outward, enough to reach the edge of the sea. The waves whispered in response, not words but agreement. The world exhaled content. And above Skjoldhar, the stars brightened, not with brilliance but with readiness. The dawn was on its way. It began with a rumor of gold, not the kind that weighs, but the kind that breathes. Light spilling through the cracks of the long night like a guilty secret. At first, Skjoldhar thought it was dawn arriving early, but the sun hadn't risen yet. The light came from beneath the world, climbing gently, as if the earth itself had decided to wake before the sky. Sigrid knew the name before anyone spoke it. "Daggaz," she whispered. "The rune of awakening." Bjorn, half asleep, grumbled from the corner. "Another one? I just got good at waiting." "This one doesn't wait," Sigrid said. "It demands." By the time the first real rays cut through the mist, the entire valley was glowing. Not hot, not blinding, just luminous, as though every blade of grass had a secret to confess. The seed of Ingwaz beneath the tree pulsed faster, brighter. The luckpot itself hummed, its roots tracing runes underfoot that no scholar had permission to name. Asmund was already writing, his ink drying mid-sentence from the heat of his excitement. Daggaz, transformation by exposure. The moment before understanding becomes unbearable. Gudrun shielded her eyes and muttered, "Sounds like morning to me." Hrock stood by the river, watching light break across the surface like laughter over silence. "She's coming," he said. "The one who ends shadows without killing them." Sigrid nodded. "Dawn isn't conquest. It's translation." Bjorn squinted at the brightening horizon. "Translation hurts." Then came the sound. Not thunder, not wind. It was a sound of everything unfolding at once. The ground shivered, the sky flexed, and from the scene between them, a horizon too alive to stay still, stepped a figure woven from pure light. She was radiant, yes, but not the cruel kind of radiant. Her glow didn't blind, it revealed. Shadows didn't vanish around her. They softened, learning new shapes. "I am Dagaz," she said. Her voice was a hush before revelation, and the sigh that follows it. "I am the moment the world stops pretending it doesn't know better." Sigrid bowed her head. "Welcome." Dagaz looked down at her, smiling. "You've worn darkness well. It suits you, but you can't keep it forever." "I wasn't planning to." "You weren't planning anything," Dagaz said gently. "That's why I was sent." Bjorn crossed his arms. "You sound like sunlight with a superiority complex." Dagaz turned her gaze toward him, and in that instant, he remembered every time he looked at someone and seen himself reflected in their eyes, and every time he hadn't. The look wasn't cruel. It was simply true. He swallowed. "Right. Illumination. Got it." The goddess stepped toward the luckpot tree. The bark rippled in recognition, its runes glowing brighter. "You've built well," she said. "Roots that listen. Branches that remember. Now you must decide what to do with everything you've learned." Sigrid frowned. "Decide?" Dagaz touched the trunk. "Every dawn is a choice. To see clearly means to lose the comfort of what used to make sense." Bjorn frowned. "You mean ignorance?" "I mean peace," Dagaz said softly. "Peace often dies with the dark." The words landed heavy. Around them, the villagers gathered, faces glowing in the gold light, eyes wide and wary. They had spent months surviving, rebuilding, forgiving. Now the world was asking for something harder. Change without tragedy. "Tell us what to do," Sigrid said. Dagaz's smile was tender. "I can't. I only show you the edges. You must step across." She turned her hand, and light poured from her palm, unfurling like cloth. It spread across the ground, forming a golden mirror where the earth had been. The villagers leaned forward and gasped. Their reflections were not their own. Gudrun saw herself as a little girl, hammering at nothing but air. Ylva saw the battlefield she'd left and the one she still carried. Hrock saw his father's face, then his son's, then both fading into one. Bjorn saw an ocean that refused to drown him no matter how many times he waded in. Sigrid saw Skjoldhar, empty, peaceful, radiant, without her in it. Her breath caught. "I don't understand." "You do," Dagaz said softly. "You're just not ready to agree." Sigrid looked at her reflection again. "Is this what comes next?" "No," Dagaz said. "This is what must end first." That night, light refused to leave. The sun dipped below the mountains, but the glow remained, softer now, folded into every surface like embers hiding in wood. People tried to sleep, but dreams refused to come. The air was too awake. Bjorn sat beside the river, watching the light flicker on the water. "So what happens now?" Sigrid joined him, hands folded in her lap. Dagaz is a hinge between worlds. She doesn't stay long. "She never does," said a voice behind them. Dagaz stood there, dimmer now, her brilliance folded into something human-shaped and kind. "I'm leaving soon," she said. "But before I go, one of you must carry my dawn." Sigrid froze. "Carry it where?" "Forward," Dagaz said, "through whatever night still lingers." Bjorn sighed. "Let me guess, you mean her—" Dagaz smiled. "She's already been chosen. I'm just making it official." Sigrid took a step back. "No, I'm no goddess. I'm not even a priest." Dagaz's eyes softened. Neither was the first sunrise. It just showed up. The goddess reached out, touching Sigrid's forehead. Warmth flooded her, soft, terrifying, endless. For a moment, she saw through every dawn that ever was. The first spark over primordial waves, the fires lit by trembling hands, the faces of those who kept watch so others could sleep. When the light dimmed, Daggers was gone. At dawn, her dawn, Sigurd woke to a changed world. The sky had edges again, sharper and bluer. The air smelled of salt and bread. The people of Skjoldhar moved differently, not slower, not faster, but surer, as if they finally trusted the day to begin without permission. Bjorn approached her, squinting. "You're glowing." She smiled. Daggers left fingerprints. He tilted his head. "You feel different. So does the world." He looked toward the sea. "Then what now?" "We rebuild again." Sigrid shook her head. "We remember that light isn't just sight. It's responsibility." Bjorn chuckled. "That's very poetic of you." "It's also exhausting," she said, laughing softly. By midday, the villagers had begun to rebuild in earnest. Not from ruin this time, but from readiness. They added windows where walls had been solid, built bridges without reasons, and left half the roofs open to sun. Asmundr painted the word again over the schoolhouse door. Gudrun forged nails that refused to rust. Ylva drew circles in the dirt where children learned to dance with their shadows instead of fearing them. Hrock, when asked what he felt, said simply weightless. As for Sigrid, she stood on the ridge overlooking the valley. The light seemed to come from everywhere now, from the ground, the trees, even the river's reflection. She whispered, "So this is dawn." The wind replied, soft and certain, "No, this is the middle of the day. You just never noticed before." She laughed, loud, bright, human, and when she turned back towards Skjoldhar, the whole valley gleamed like a promise kept. By the time the light settled, Skjoldhar had forgotten how to be afraid of shadows. People left their doors open at night, not out of carelessness, but out of strange new faith that whatever came in deserved to see what it was touching. The sea was calm, the air bright, the sky full of patient clouds that looked as if they were waiting for an invitation to speak. But beneath that calm, something deeper stirred. Not danger, not divine command, but memory. Because dawn, no matter how beautiful, always remembers the houses that built it. Sigrid woke one morning to the sound of walls sighing. Not creaking, sighing. The sound came from every structure in Skjoldhar, doors breathing, beams shifting, windows humming softly. The houses had begun to remember their owners. Bjorn stood outside the schoolhouse, staring up at the eaves. "You hear that?" "Yes," Sigrid said. "They're talking." "About what?" She listened. The timbers whispered in low, steady rhythms, full of warmth and fatigue. About who loved them and who left. Bjorn raised an eyebrow. "Houses gossip?" "They grieve," she corrected. "And Athala listens." By noon, the runes on the luckpot tree had begun to shimmer again. This time the glow was soft, domestic, less fire, more hearth. The roots pulsed toward the houses of the village, thin threads of light creeping along thresholds, curling around foundations. It wasn't intrusion. It was inheritance. Asmundr recognized it first. "Athala," he murmured, "the rune of legacy. Home, the sum of everything we leave behind that still loves us." Gudrun leaned against her forge, wiping sweat from her brow. "And what if what we left behind doesn't love us?" "Then Athala teaches it how." Ylva said simply. That evening, when the lamps were lit, the village gathered in the square. The light from every house mingled with the glow of the luckpot tree, forming a single slow pulse, a heartbeat made of roofs and soil and stories. Sigrid stood before them. "Athala is the circle closing," she said. "The moment when home starts remembering better than we do." Bjorn frowned. "That sounds nice, but also creepy." She smiled. "Home isn't walls. It's what echoes when we stop speaking." And then, as if in response, the echoes began. At first, they were faint, laughter from another room, footsteps that didn't belong to anyone alive, the hush of prayers whispered decades ago. Then, one by one, the houses began to answer. From Gudrun's forge came her mother's voice. "You finally learned to hit the iron while it listens." From the schoolhouse came a teacher's hum, the lullaby she used to write on the board when chalk still squeaked like new snow. From Ilva's home came a soldier's promise. You fought enough. Let the walls keep watch now. Even the sea joined in, sending waves that broke not with thunder, but with syllables, the old names of ships, of lovers, of storm forgiven. Bjorn stepped forward, eyes wide. Are we haunting ourselves? No, Sigurd said. We're returning ourselves. Athala's memory made safe. That night, she dreamed of the first house. It stood alone, built before what knew it could burn. Inside, warm pool like honey. A fire, yes, but not consuming. A presence stirred in the corner, old as architecture itself. A woman woven of brick dust and breath, her eyes like open doors. She smiled at Sigurd with the familiarity of something that had been waiting a very long time. You've kept the flame, she said. Who are you? Sigurd asked. Athala, said the woman. I am the house that never forgets. Sigurd looked around. Then why do we build new ones? To remember differently, Athala said. Every home is an echo learning to speak in the present tense. Sigurd frowned. Echoes fade, only when ignored. The goddess placed a hand on her shoulder. Tell them the truth of return. That coming home is not going back. It's bringing forward everything you've learned. Before Sigurd could answer, the dream folded into light. 1,000 doorways swinging open at once. She woke before dawn. The air was thick with quiet, the kind that expects gratitude. She stepped outside barefoot. The ground was warm under her feet, pulsing faintly with life. The houses glowed from within, not from fire, but from recognition. Bjorn was already outside, staring toward the horizon where the sea met the hills. You saw her too, didn't you? Sigurd nodded. She told me home isn't where you live. It's where you stop pretending you were ever lost. He smiled faintly. So Skjoldhar's not a place anymore. No, she said. It's a way of remembering. They stood in silence as the first light touched the roofs. The beams of dawn bent slightly, wrapping around each building like fingers around a pulse. Asmundr joined them, holding his notebook like a holy text. I think Athala wants us to give something back. Gudrun crossed her arms. After everything we've done for her? She's not asking for worship, Sigurd said. She's asking for continuance. So they built again, not higher, not stronger, but truer. They repaired every door that had been closed too long, and every window that had been nailed shut out of habit. They left space between stones for the wind to speak. They carved names, not of saints or kings, but of moments. The night the storm ended, the morning the bread rose, the day the silence forgave them. At the center of the village, they built one last house, with no owner, no door, no roof. A home open to every voice, every season, every return. They called it the House of Echoes. Inside, they left nothing but a single chair and a bowl of water that reflected whatever memory needed to rest. On the night they finished, Athala came one last time, not as a goddess, but as warmth filling every corner. Her voice filled the House of Echoes. You have remembered enough. Now forget beautifully. And just like that, the glow faded from the walls. The air cooled. The echoes softened into silence, not erasure, but peace. Sigurd smiled. Home, she whispered. Finally. Bjorn nodded. So what's next? The last rune, she said. The one that never ends. He grinned. Let me guess. It's about death again? She laughed. No, it's about continuation. And outside, beneath the aurora that had learned to blush, the tree beside the luck pot shimmered once more. At its roots, the runes began to rearrange, forming the final shape. Not a line, not a letter, an infinity folded into a circle. The world was almost ready to close the song. It began quietly, as all well should. No fanfare, no storm, just a faint ringing in the soil, the sound of something realizing it had too much and wanted to give some away. The glow from the luck pot tree had faded after Othala's visit, but the roots still pulsed, slow and content, like an old heart learning a new rhythm. Then one morning, every coin in Skjoldhar began to hum, not loudly, just enough that people looked up from their bread, their fishing nets, their notebooks, and realized that the world was reminding them of value. Asmund held one to his ear, then laughed. It's singing a debt to itself. Bjorn flipped his over. It's out of tune. Sigrid turned hers in the light. It wasn't gold anymore. It wasn't even metal. It was warmed, condensed, shaped, patient. She knew the name before she said it aloud. Fehu, she whispered. The rune of giving. In the days that followed, abundance returned like a season that didn't apologize for being late. Fish swam upriver again. The wheat turned green overnight. Even the air seemed to taste of generosity. The people of Skjoldhar had never been rich, but they had learned the rhythm of enough. That made Fehu's lesson both easy and impossible. Because wealth, properly understood, is a conversation, and the world had just started talking back. Gudrun was the first to notice the change. Her forge, quiet since Athala, began to glow again, not hot, not fiery, but warm like gratitude. When she hammered the first bar of iron that morning, sparks scattered and did not fade. They drifted through the air, landed on old tools, and mended them by memory alone. She stared wide-eyed. It's repairing itself. Hrock nodded, smiling. So is everything else. Indeed it was. The cracked pottery at Ylva's table sealed itself with silver lines. The holes in the fishermen's nets rewove in patterns so intricate they caught even the wind. And the worn pages of Asmunder's oldest book reappeared, the ink rewriting itself in a hand he didn't recognize. This is dangerous, he said softly. Why? Sigrid asked. Because people forget the gift isn't for keeping. At sunset, they gathered in the square again. The luck pot tree shimmered faintly gold, its branches bending with fruit that looked like drops of light, heavy and soft, glowing from within. Fehu arrived as the last of the light touched the ridge. She came barefoot, her cloak stitched from coins that never clinked, her hair woven with strands of thread spun from kindness remembered. When she walked, the ground brightened, not from wealth but from recognition. Fehu, Sigrid said, bowing slightly, you honor us. I do not honor, Fehu replied, voice low and musical. I return. Bjorn frowned. Return what? What was borrowed at the beginning? She said. Every dawn, every breath, every kindness you mistook for yours. Ylva crossed her arms. So this is about paying back? Fehu smiled, and even her smile sounded like generosity. No, it's about passing forward. She walked among them, touching objects as she passed. A broom, a hammer, a net, a spoon. Each glowed briefly and then stilled, a faint warmth remaining. These, she said, remember who made them, who used them, who needed them. They are full of unspent gratitude. Gudrun swallowed. We don't know how to repay that. Fehu looked at her gently, then stopped trying to. Gratitude is a circle, not an arrow. Sigrid stepped closer. Then what do we do with it? Fehu's eyes brightened. Spend it. Bjorn blinked. Spend gratitude? Yes, she said, smiling. Give until giving is its own inheritance. That night, Skjoldhar did something strange. They didn't trade. They didn't barter. They didn't even count. They simply gave. Gudrun spent the evening mending every roof she could reach, singing under her breath. Hrock delivered wood to every door without being asked. Ylva took her spear apart and used the metal to make door hinges for the House of Echoes. Asmund copied his favorite stories onto loose pages and left them in the square for strangers to find. Bjorn brought fish, fresh, salted, smoked, and handed them out until his hands were empty. Sigrid, without ceremony, sat beneath the luckpot tree and listened. The roots whispered approval. The village glowed, not from magic, but from warmth, from exhaustion earned honestly. Fehu watched from the ridge, her cloak faintly swaying in the night breeze. They understand, she murmured. Finally, by morning, something remarkable had happened. All the coins, the ones that had sung the day before, were gone. People searched their cupboards, their pockets, the spaces between floorboards. Nothing, not one remained. Yet no one panicked. The village still thrived. The food still flowed. The tools still worked. They didn't need the coins anymore. The value had moved into them. Bjorn grinned, holding up his hands. Guess I'm rich in calluses. Sigrid smiled. Then you've invested well. Asmundr wrote on the wall of the schoolhouse. Fehu, wealth is what multiplies when you give it away. Gudrun read it aloud. Simple, dangerous, perfect. That evening, Fehu appeared one last time. This time she came not to teach, but to close. You've learned what all the gods feared to know, she said. That ownership is a kind of loneliness. Sigrid bowed. We'll remember. No, Fehu said softly. You'll forget beautifully. That's how cycles renew. Bjorn stepped forward. So this is it? The last lesson? Fehu looked toward the horizon, where the sea shimmered with quiet gold. Almost. There is one more rune. The one that doesn't belong to gods or mortals. Which one? Sigrid asked. Fehu's smile was slow, infinite. The unnamed one. The rune that writes itself when you're not looking. Then she reached into the air and drew it. Not on bark, not on stone, but on light itself. A curve, a circle, an unfinished question. When the story ends, she said, let it continue as kindness. And with that, she was gone. The next morning, Skjoldhar woke to an ordinary day. The air was cool, the gulls loud, the sea familiar. The runes on the luckpot tree had faded back into bark. The houses no longer whispered. And yet, every breath felt richer. Children laughed louder. The baker's hands worked steadier. Even the silence between footsteps seemed worth keeping. Sigrid stood at the edge of the water with Bjorn, watching the tide move in and out. He broke the silence first. Do you think it's over? She shook her head. Nothing that gives back ever ends. He smiled. Then what do we call it? She looked at the horizon, where the sea met the sky in one unbroken shimmer. The rune without a name, she said. The one that means enough. Bjorn nodded, thoughtful. And what happens now? Sigrid smiled faintly. Now we live the rest of it. And as they turned back towards Skjoldhar, the morning light curved across the waves, a perfect circle folding into itself, a promise fulfilled not by ending but by returning. At first, no one noticed that the world had stopped whispering. The wind still moved. The sea still breathed. The trees still spoke in the low dialect of roots. But the divine murmur, the subtle resonance that had guided Skjoldhar through storm, silence, thaw, and dawn, had gone quiet, not vanished, just resting. The villagers didn't panic. By now, they'd learned that quiet wasn't the enemy. Still, the absence felt like stepping into a familiar room and finding it cleaner than expected. Everything was in place, yet some essential sound, the heartbeat beneath the floorboards, had hushed. Sigrid was the first to name it. The gods are asleep, she said softly. Bjorn looked up from mending his net. Then we shouldn't wake them. The days that followed were strange in their simplicity. Nothing shimmered. Nothing glowed. The luckpot tree stood tall, unlit but alive. Children played in the streets. Fishermen hummed instead of praying. The forge rang without sparks of prophecy. It should have felt ordinary. It didn't, because ordinary was now sacred. Asmundr called it the age of breathing. He wrote it down with deliberate strokes, muttering, "The final rune writes itself on the everyday." Gudrun, hammering a nail into a roof beam, added, "Then make sure it's spelled right." Even Ylva, who had seen too much of gods and war to trust either, smiled as she passed. Let them rest. The world's finally remembering its own hands. One evening, near twilight, a soft vibration stirred beneath the soil. Not divine, not unnatural, just curious. Sigrid felt it first, a pulse like a heartbeat under her feet. "The tree," she whispered. The others gathered as the light changed. The luckpot tree wasn't glowing, it was breathing. The bark rose and fell in slow rhythm, each exhale releasing a faint shimmer of dust that caught the dying sun. The roots hummed, deep and low, a sound that settled in the chest rather than the ears. Bjorn frowned. "I thought we were done with miracles." Sigrid shook her head. "We're not witnessing one. We're keeping it company." When night fell, the stars above Skjoldhar rearranged themselves. No constellations of gods or beasts, only a spiral, wide and patient, curling toward the horizon. It pulsed once, faintly, and the air trembled with a tone like gratitude remembering its own shape. Hrock pointed upward. It's moving. No, Sigurd said. It's mirroring. Indeed, the star's spiral matched the pattern of the luckpot tree's roots below. Earth and sky had become reflections again, completing a dialogue so old to have forgotten its first question. Asmunder's voice broke the hush. That's it, isn't it? The last rune. The one that never had a name. Sigurd nodded. It's everything that remained when the rest ended. Bjorn tilted his head. So, what do we call it? Sigurd smiled faintly. We don't. They waited, half expecting some divine figure to emerge, a god of endings or beginnings perhaps, to tie the knot. But nothing came. No light split the clouds. No thunder spoke in riddles. Only the wind, gentle and unhurried, moving through the branches of the tree, like the world sighing in contentment. Maybe that's the point, Ylva said. We finished the sentence ourselves. Sigurd looked at her, then at the others gathered around. The blacksmith, the scholar, the fisherman, the soldier, the singer, the children with their lanterns. Every face shone with quiet certainty. No gods, Sigurd said softly. No runes left to read. Just the ones we become. Bjorn nodded. And we'll write them by living. At dawn, the horizon was clearer than it had ever been. The light was soft, golden, unhurried, the kind that doesn't command attention, but earns it. The air smelled of bread and salt and a touch of spring. Skjoldhar stood, alive and unguarded, its houses leaning slightly toward one another like friends mid-laughter. The people gathered in the square, as they had so many times before, but this time without a purpose. No rituals, no omens, no waiting. Sigurd walked to the tree and pressed her palm against its trunk. The warmth that met her wasn't divine. It was familiar. The same warmth as a shared meal, a healed wound, a word forgiven before it was spoken. She closed her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. The bark pulsed under her hand. Once, then silent again, complete, kind, perfect. Years passed, though no one counted them closely anymore. The gods never returned. The runes stopped glowing. And yet, when a child was born, the air shimmered briefly. When someone died, the sea sang low and gentle. When storms came, they stayed just long enough to wash the roofs clean. Skjoldhar endured, not as a legend, but as a place that had learned how to mean what it said. And in time, travelers came from far-off lands. Sailors, seekers, skeptics, drawn by stories of a village where the divine had once lived and left peacefully. They always asked the same question. What happened here? And every villager gave the same answer, in their own way. The world remembered itself. One evening, long after even Sigurd and Bjorn had become stories told by firelight, a young child sat beneath the tree, tracing patterns in the dirt. Her finger followed the lines of an ancient rune carved into the root, a circle that wasn't quite closed. She frowned and pressed her thumb gently to complete it. The ground pulsed once, faintly. A breeze rose, playful and curious. The air whispered, not in words, but in feeling. Continue. The child smiled and kept tracing. And far above Skjoldhar, the spiral of stars began to move again, slowly, easily, as if stretching after long, contented sleep. The gods didn't wake. They didn't need to. The world was speaking just fine on its own.